History sometimes feels like it's written by the most imaginative storytellers, except these stories actually happened. Picture this: a small town in the year 1518, where hundreds of people suddenly began dancing in the streets, unable to stop, some collapsing from sheer exhaustion, even dying. No music, no reason, just an unstoppable frenzy that defies all explanation. And that's just one of the 25 jaw-dropping events we're about to uncover. From unexplained plagues of laughter to entire villages vanishing without a trace, history is packed with moments so bizarre, you'll question whether they could possibly be real. By the time we reach the end, you'll have witnessed inexplicable disasters, eerie hoaxes that fooled entire cities, and mysteries that still stump experts today. Stick around, because truth isn't just stranger than fiction, it's far more unsettling. And trust me, you won't want to miss a single one of these unbelievable tales. Now let's step into the strangest dance party in history, one nobody wanted an invitation to. In the summer of 1518, the streets of Strasbourg became the stage for a nightmare. It started with a single woman, Frau Trophia, who began dancing wildly without reason. Within days, hundreds more joined her, their bodies convulsing in an unstoppable, frenzied rhythm. They danced until their feet bled, until their hearts gave out, some collapsing from sheer exhaustion. Authorities, desperate for answers, even built stages and hired musicians, believing the dancers needed to get it out of their system. But the music only fueled the madness, so what caused this terrifying spectacle? One leading theory points to ergot poisoning, a fungus that grows on damp rye, producing chemicals similar to LSD. If the townspeople ate contaminated bread, hallucinations and spasms could explain the dancing. Yet not all historians agree. Others argue it was mass psychogenic illness, a kind of social contagion where fear and stress manifest physically. Strasbourg at the time was riddled with famine, disease, and superstition. Imagine the panic, watching your neighbors dance themselves to death, wondering if you'd be next. The societal fallout was profound. The plague shattered trust in both medicine and religion, as neither prayers nor doctors could stop it. Some victims were later accused of demonic possession, deepening the town's paranoia. And while the dancing eventually stopped, the mystery never faded. To this day, it challenges our understanding of how the mind and body can betray us, or how unseen forces, from toxins to collective trauma, can rewrite reality. This wasn't just a historical oddity. It was a window into how easily society can unravel when faced with the unexplainable. And as we'll see, Strasbourg's nightmare was just the first in a series of events where the line between biology and belief blurs beyond recognition. But before we leave Strasbourg's eerie dance floors behind, let's unpack the science and the lingering questions behind this phenomenon. The ergot poisoning theory remains one of the most compelling explanations. Picture this: damp rye fields, a common staple in medieval Europe, harboring a toxic fungus. When ingested, it could induce violent muscle spasms, hallucinations, and even gangrene. Yet here's the catch: not all victims reported visions, and the dancing lasted weeks, far longer than typical ergotism symptoms. That's where psychology enters the stage. Mass psychogenic illness, sometimes called mass hysteria, offers another lens. Think of it as a shared physical reaction to extreme stress. Strasbourg in 1518 was a pressure cooker of suffering: crop failures, rampant disease, and societal collapse. When Frau Trophia began dancing, it may have ignited a collective breakdown, a desperate physical expression of unspoken terror. Modern parallels exist, like the Tanganyika laughter epidemic of 1962 or the mysterious twitching outbreaks in U.S. schools. In each case, no toxin was found, just a community unraveling under invisible strains. What makes these events so unsettling is how they expose the fragility of human control. Even today, with advanced medicine, Outbreaks of unexplained symptoms from convulsions to skin rashes emerge in tightly knit groups, often among adolescents or marginalized communities. Doctors often diagnose conversion disorder, where psychological distress manifests as physical symptoms, but labels don't erase the suffering. The dancing plague forces us to ask, where does biology end and belief begin? In 2019, a factory in Mexico reported workers fainting and vomiting after rumors spread about a toxic leak. No chemicals were found, just fear. Similarly, social media now amplifies psychogenic outbreaks with TikTok tics and phantom phone vibration syndrome, showing how easily our bodies mirror our anxieties. Strasbourg's dancers didn't choose their fate. Whether poisoned or psychologically besieged, their story is a cautionary tale about the power of the unseen, be it a fungus or a collective nightmare. And as we'll discover next, history has even stranger chapters where reality seems to bend under the weight of the unknown. Now let's step into another chapter where reality seemed to unravel, this time not with dancing but with laughter. In 1962, at a mission-run girls' school in Tanganyika, now Tanzania, an ordinary day turned surreal when 3 students began giggling uncontrollably. It might sound harmless, even joyful, but this was no ordinary laughter. Within weeks, nearly 100 students were caught in its grip, their hysterical fits lasting hours, sometimes days, making it impossible to attend classes. The epidemic spread like wildfire, leaping to nearby villages and lasting for months. So what sparked this bizarre outbreak? Unlike the dancing plague, there was no suspected toxin here. Instead, researchers zeroed in on the psychological pressures these girls faced. The school was strict, with high academic expectations and rigid discipline. Many students were far from home, separated from their families for the first time. Laughter, often a release valve for stress, may have mutated into something far more disruptive. Doctors noted that the laughter was often accompanied by tears, screaming, and even fainting signs. It was less about joy and more about overwhelming emotional distress. The social dynamics were equally telling. The laughter spread primarily among students who shared dorms or classrooms, mirroring patterns of mass psychogenic illness. Witnessing their peers' fits seemed to trigger similar reactions, a chain reaction fueled by empathy, fear, or even subconscious mimicry. Modern psychology calls this emotional contagion, where emotions, especially intense ones, ripple through groups. Think of it like a yawn. You see someone do it and suddenly you can't help but follow. But why laughter? Some theorists point to cultural context. In many societies, laughter isn't just happiness. It can signal nervousness, discomfort, or even protest. For these students, it might have been the only acceptable way to express pent-up frustration in a restrictive environment. Notably, the epidemic didn't spread to teachers or boys' schools, hinting at how gender and authority played roles. The outbreak eventually faded, but its echoes linger. Similar cases have popped up globally, from a laughter epidemic in Uganda in 2012 to twitching outbreaks in U.S. schools. Each time, the culprit isn't a virus but invisible stressors, oppressive routines, societal upheaval, or unspoken anxieties. The Tanganyika incident reminds us that the human mind can turn even laughter into a cry for help, blurring the line between biology and the weight of our circumstances. And just when you think history couldn't get stranger, along comes a conflict where the enemy wasn't an army but birds. A story we'll tackle next. Now let's peel back another layer of this strange phenomenon to see how the Tanganyika laughter epidemic was viewed through different lenses. Locally, the reaction was a mix of concern and confusion. Parents, unable to comprehend why their daughters were laughing uncontrollably for days, often blamed supernatural forces or even curses. Traditional healers were called in, attempting rituals to cleanse the affected children, while missionaries and school authorities leaned toward discipline, convinced the girls were acting out. This clash of interpretations, spiritual versus behavioral, highlighted the tension between indigenous beliefs and colonial education systems. Internationally, the event became a fascination for psychologists and medical researchers. Journals in Europe and North America published accounts of the epidemic, framing it as a case study in mass hysteria. What made it particularly intriguing was its purely psychological roots. Unlike other outbreaks linked to toxins or infections, this one seemed to thrive on stress and social dynamics. The term mass psychogenic illness gained traction, describing how shared emotional distress could manifest physically in a group, but the implications went deeper. The laughter epidemic became a mirror for broader societal stresses. Tanganyika had just gained independence from Britain in 1961, and the country was navigating massive cultural shifts. For these schoolgirls, the pressure to excel in a rigid academic system, combined with the dislocation from their families, created a pressure cooker of anxiety. Their bodies, quite literally, laughed instead of screamed. Modern researchers compare it to how soldiers in World War I developed shell shock, a physical response to unbearable psychological strain. The medical perspective also revealed gaps in how we understand collective behavior. Doctors noted that treating individual students did little to stop the outbreak. Instead, isolating the affected groups and reducing stressors like relaxing school rules helped slow the spread. This underscored a critical lesson. Emotional contagion isn't cured with medicine, but with environmental change. Today, similar patterns emerge in workplaces or online communities, where stress or panic can ripple through groups at alarming speed. One of the most striking takeaways is how culture shapes these phenomena. In Tanganyika, laughter carried layered meanings. It wasn't just joy but a silent protest, a release valve for girls with little agency. Compare this to a 2007 case in a New York school where students developed twitching tics. There, the symptoms were physical, not vocal, reflecting different ways bodies express collective distress. The laughter epidemic forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. How often do we dismiss strange group behaviors as mere quirks, missing the deeper societal cracks beneath? And in an age of viral misinformation and online panic, could understanding these patterns help us navigate modern outbreaks of collective anxiety? The Tanganyika case isn't just a historical oddity, it's a roadmap to the invisible ways stress moves through communities, proving that sometimes the body speaks when words fail. And with that, we turn to a conflict where the adversary wasn't stress or superstition, but something far feistier, a war that Australia embarrassingly lost to birds. Now let's shift gears to a conflict so bizarre it feels like satire: the Great Emu War of 1932, where Australia's military found itself outmaneuvered by an unlikely enemy. Picture this: soldiers armed with machine guns deployed to the outback not to fight an invading army, but to wage war against thousands of emus. These flightless birds, standing over 6 feet tall and capable of sprinting at 30 miles per hour, had become a menace to farmers in Western Australia. After World War I, veterans were granted land to grow wheat, but their crops were devastated by emus migrating inland during a drought. Desperate, farmers petitioned the government for help, and the army, equipped with Lewis guns and a surplus of confidence, answered the call. The campaign began with high hopes. On November 2nd, troops ambushed a flock of emus near Campion, only to discover their targets were shockingly resilient. The birds scattered in chaotic, zigzagging patterns, making them nearly impossible to hit. Even when bullets found their mark, emus could absorb multiple shots before falling. After 2 days and thousands of rounds fired, the army reported a measly dozen kills. The media had a field day, mocking the operation with headlines like "Emus proved too wily for army gunners." Humiliated, the troops retreated. A second offensive was launched later that month, but the emus adapted. They split into smaller groups, vanishing into the brush or charging straight at the gunners as if taunting them. The soldiers, trained for trench warfare, were utterly unprepared for guerrilla tactics by birds. By December, the military admitted defeat, withdrawing with an estimated emu body count in the low hundreds out of a population of 20,000. Farmers, still struggling, resorted to bounties, which proved far more effective than bullets. What makes this farce more than just a punchline is how it exposes humanity's arrogance in controlling nature. The emus weren't invaders, they were native species displaced by human agriculture. The war also highlighted the military's limitations. Machine guns designed for European battlefields were useless against fast, decentralized targets. Today, the event is a cautionary tale about overestimating technology and underestimating wildlife. Australia eventually embraced the emu as a national symbol, immortalized on the coat of arms alongside the kangaroo. Ironic, isn't it? The birds that humbled a nation now represent it. Beyond the absurdity, the Emu War raises questions about human-wildlife conflict. When we disrupt ecosystems, who's really to blame for the fallout? And how often do we reach for force when patience and adaptation would work better? As we'll see next, not all historical mishaps involve feathers. Some come with a much stickier aftermath. Now let's peel back another layer of this surreal chapter to see what happened after the guns fell silent. The Great Emu War didn't just fade into history as a quirky anecdote, it left real scars on Australia's agricultural policies and collective psyche. Farmers, already battered by the Great Depression, now faced a grim reality. No amount of bullets could solve their emu problem. The government's failed military campaign forced a reckoning. Instead of artillery, officials turned to a more pragmatic solution: bounty systems. By offering cash for each emu killed, they incentivized locals to hunt the birds sustainably. Remarkably, this low-tech approach worked far better than machine guns, proving that sometimes the simplest solutions are the most effective. The ecological fallout was equally revealing. Emus, it turned out, weren't just mindless crop destroyers, they were vital to the ecosystem. Their seed-spreading habits helped regenerate vegetation, and their movements kept insect populations in check. The war had shown how blindly declaring war on nature could backfire. Over time, farmers adopted non-lethal tactics like fencing and diversionary feeding, acknowledging that coexistence was cheaper and more practical than combat. Politically, the debacle became a punchline with a purpose. Lawmakers used the absurdity to highlight the dangers of knee-jerk military interventions, even in non-traditional conflicts. The episode also exposed tensions between urban policymakers and rural communities. While city dwellers laughed at the headlines, farmers seethed at the government's misplaced priorities. This disconnect would later influence how Australia approached conservation and agricultural subsidies, with more emphasis on local knowledge over top-down solutions. Perhaps the most ironic twist came decades later when the emu was embraced as a national icon. The very birds once branded as pests now symbolize resilience and adaptability, qualities Australians pride themselves on. You'll find them on the 50-cent coin and even passports, a wry nod to the conflict that redefined humility. The Emu War's legacy isn't just about failed firepower, it's a masterclass in unintended consequences. When we try to dominate nature without understanding it, nature often wins. This lesson echoes today, from debates over invasive species to climate change. As we move forward, remember this: history's strangest events often hold the sharpest mirrors to human nature. Next up, a disaster where the enemy wasn't birds or bullets, but an unexpected flood of beer that swept through London with deadly force. But now, let's turn our attention to a disaster of an entirely different kind, one where the threat wasn't feathered or militarized but fermented. Picture this: London, October 1814. The Mew and Company Brewery, a massive operation in the heart of the city, stored its beer in towering wooden vats, each held together by iron rings. One of these vats, containing over 350,000 liters of porter, suddenly burst. The force of the rupture shattered neighboring vats, and within moments, a 15-foot wave of beer exploded into the streets. This was no celebratory deluge. The tidal wave of alcohol swept through the slums of St. Giles, a densely packed neighborhood where families lived in basement apartments. The beer crashed through walls and flooded homes, drowning 8 people, including a teenage girl celebrating her wake and a mother holding her child. The victims had no warning, no chance to escape the tsunami of stout. Rescuers waded through waist-deep beer, pulling survivors from the wreckage as the sticky liquid soaked everything in its path. But how did this bizarre tragedy happen? The answer lies in the precarious industrial practices of the era. The brewery's vats were aging relics, their iron bands corroded and weakened. Inspections were cursory at best, and the demand for cheap beer meant corners were cut. London's working class drank porter by the gallon. It was safer than contaminated water, so breweries prioritized quantity over safety. The flood exposed the brutal realities of early industrialization, where profit often trumped human life. The social backdrop made the disaster even crueler. St. Giles was a notorious slum, home to the city's poorest laborers. When the beer flood hit, the public reaction was a mix of horror and grim irony. Newspapers mocked the victims as drunk on fate, while the coroner's inquest ruled the deaths an act of God, absolving the brewery of blame. It wasn't just a freak accident, it was a symptom of a system that viewed the poor as expendable. The London beer flood remains a surreal footnote in history, but its lessons are sobering. It wasn't just about faulty barrels, it was about the cost of unchecked industry and the lives deemed disposable in its wake. Next, we'll see how this tragedy reshaped laws and attitudes, because sometimes it takes a wave of beer to wake people up. The aftermath of the London beer flood was as murky as the porter that flooded St. Giles. While the disaster claimed lives and homes, the legal response was shockingly lenient. The coroner's inquest, tasked with investigating the deaths, concluded with a verdict that would baffle modern sensibilities: act of God. This archaic legal term placed blame on divine intervention rather than human negligence, effectively shielding Mew and Company Brewery from any financial or criminal consequences. The brewery's owners walked away unscathed, even receiving a tax refund for the lost beer, a bitter irony for grieving families who received no compensation. Public reaction to the tragedy was equally troubling. Newspapers of the era treated the event with a mix of sensationalism and dark humor. Headlines joked about death by ale, while editorials dismissed the victims as casualties of their own poverty. The working-class residents of St. Giles were already stigmatized, and the beer flood only deepened the public's indifference to their suffering. Yet amid the callousness, a quieter outrage simmered. Reformers and labor advocates seized on the disaster as proof of the dangers posed by unregulated industry. The flood became a symbol, a stark illustration of how easily the poor were sacrificed for profit. The tragedy did, however, plant seeds of change. While no sweeping laws were passed immediately, the beer flood exposed glaring flaws in urban safety standards. Breweries across London began voluntarily reinforcing their vats, fearing both future disasters and public backlash. Over time, the incident contributed to a growing movement for industrial reform, culminating in stricter building codes and inspection requirements decades later. It was a slow reckoning, but the flood's legacy echoed in later reforms like the Factory Acts, which sought to protect workers from hazardous conditions. Perhaps the most enduring lesson of the beer flood wasn't legal but moral. The disaster laid bare the inequalities of the Industrial Revolution, where the wealthy could literally drown the poor in their pursuit of profit. Today, the event serves as a cautionary tale, a reminder that safety regulations often arise from tragedy, and that justice delayed can be justice denied. Next, we'll shift from the horrors of industrialization to a mystery that defies explanation: the eerie, unexplained hum haunting a small town in New Mexico. Now let's journey from the industrial chaos of 19th century London to the quiet desert town of Taos, New Mexico, where an entirely different kind of disturbance has left residents baffled for decades. Imagine trying to sleep at night only to be haunted by a persistent, low-pitched hum, a sound with no clear source, yet impossible to ignore. This is the Taos Hum, an unexplained phenomenon that has tormented a small but significant portion of the town's population since the early 1990s. Those who hear it describe the hum as akin to a distant diesel engine idling or a refrigerator running somewhere in the house. But here's the catch: no matter how hard they search, they can't locate where it's coming from. The sound seems to permeate the air itself, felt as much as heard, with some claiming it vibrates through their bones. What makes the Taos Hum even stranger is that not everyone can detect it. Estimates suggest only about 2% of the local population hears it, adding a layer of isolation to their frustration. Imagine trying to convince your neighbors about a noise they simply can't perceive. So what could be causing this eerie auditory mystery? Over the years, researchers have proposed a slew of theories, each more intriguing than the last. One early hypothesis pointed to secret military experiments. Taos isn't far from several sensitive government sites, including Los Alamos National Laboratory, fueling speculation about underground testing or clandestine technology emitting low-frequency waves. Yet, despite persistent rumors, no declassified documents or whistleblowers have ever confirmed such a connection. Another angle focuses on geological activity. Some scientists suggest the hum could stem from microseismic vibrations, subtle movements in the Earth's crust that generate resonant frequencies. Taos sits near the Rio Grande Rift, a tectonically active zone, making this idea plausible. But if that's the case, why don't seismic instruments consistently pick up these vibrations? And why does the hum seem so localized? Then there's the psychological explanation. Skeptics argue the Taos Hum might be a form of tinnitus, a condition where individuals perceive sound without an external source. But this doesn't fully hold up, as many who report the hum have no history of hearing disorders. Even more puzzling, some visitors to Taos have reported hearing the hum and then losing the ability to detect it once they leave the area. As the debate continues, one thing is clear: the Taos Hum remains an unsolved enigma. Whether it's the result of hidden technology, the Earth's hidden rhythms, or something even stranger, this auditory ghost serves as a reminder of how much we still don't understand about the world around us. Next, we'll dig deeper into the scientific investigations that have tried, and so far failed, to pin down the source of this haunting sound. Shifting our focus to the science behind the mystery, let's examine the rigorous efforts to unravel the Taos Hum. Over the years, multiple studies have attempted to pinpoint the source of this elusive sound, blending cutting-edge technology with old-fashioned detective work. Yet, every lead seems to dissolve into more questions, leaving researchers and residents equally perplexed. One of the most comprehensive investigations was led by a team from the University of New Mexico in the mid-1990s. Armed with sensitive audio equipment, they scoured Taos, capturing ambient noise and isolating frequencies. Their findings were both intriguing and frustrating. While they did detect a faint, low-frequency vibration, around 40 Hz, just at the threshold of human hearing, it didn't match the descriptions of the hum reported by locals. Even stranger, the vibration wasn't constant. It flickered in and out like a radio signal struggling to stay tuned. This inconsistency made it impossible to conclude whether it was the source of the phenomenon or just background noise. Another compelling study came from the Los Alamos National Laboratory, where physicists explored the possibility of the hum being an electromagnetic phenomenon. They theorized that certain individuals might be unusually sensitive to electromagnetic fields, converting them into auditory sensations. To test this, they exposed volunteers to controlled EM fields in a lab setting. A handful of participants reported hearing a low buzzing, but the results weren't consistent enough to validate the theory. Worse, the lab couldn't replicate the exact conditions described by Taos residents, leaving the idea tantalizing but unproven. Skeptics, meanwhile, have leaned into psychological explanations. Could the Taos Hum be a case of mass suggestion? Once the story of the hum spread, it's possible that people became hyper-aware of ordinary sounds, interpreting them as something extraordinary. But this doesn't account for the fact that some individuals reported the hum before it became widely known. Nor does it explain why the sound seems to vanish when people leave Taos, only to return when they come back. Adding to the puzzle, a 2012 study by the Acoustical Society of America proposed that the hum might be a rare form of spontaneous autocaustic emissions, sounds generated by the inner ear itself. While this could explain why only some people hear it, the study conceded that it doesn't clarify why the phenomenon is geographically concentrated. If it were purely biological, why wouldn't it appear everywhere? Decades of research have yielded no definitive answers, and the Taos Hum endures as one of modern science's most stubborn riddles. What makes it so compelling isn't just the mystery itself, but what it reveals about the limits of our understanding. Sometimes, even with the best tools and brightest minds, the world keeps its secrets. Next, we'll step into another eerie tale, this time a panic sparked not by sound, but by sheer imagination as we explore the Halifax slasher hoax. But not all mysteries are rooted in unexplained phenomena. Sometimes they're born from pure imagination. Take the Halifax slasher, a phantom menace that sent an entire English town into a frenzy in 1938. What began as a single whispered rumor snowballed into weeks of terror, revealing just how quickly fear can outpace facts. The panic erupted in November when locals in Halifax, West Yorkshire, started reporting attacks by a shadowy figure wielding a razor. Witnesses described a tall, cloaked man striking at random, slashing victims before vanishing into the night. The stories spread like wildfire, each retelling adding grisly new details. Newspapers, eager for headlines, amplified the claims without verification. Soon, the entire town was on edge, with armed vigilantes patrolling the streets and families barricading their doors. Yet there was a glaring problem. No actual evidence of a slasher existed. Police scrambled to investigate, but every alleged victim's story fell apart under scrutiny. One man claimed he'd been attacked, only to admit he'd cut himself shaving. A woman's slash wounds turned out to be scratches from a bramble bush. Even the supposed weapon, a razor, was never found. The truth became clear. The Halifax slasher was a collective delusion fed by wartime anxiety and sensational journalism. Psychologists later pinpointed the perfect storm that fueled the hysteria. The late 1930s were a time of heightened tension, with World War II looming. People were primed to expect danger, making them quick to misinterpret mundane events as threats. The media's role was equally critical. Papers like the Halifax Courier ran dramatic front-page stories, often quoting unverified accounts as fact. This created a feedback loop. The more people read about the slasher, the more they saw him in every shadow. The hoax finally collapsed when police, frustrated by the chaos, staged a mock arrest of a local man known for harmless eccentricities. The public, desperate for closure, accepted it without question. Almost overnight, the slasher vanished from headlines, leaving behind a sobering lesson about the power of rumor. What makes the Halifax slasher haunting isn't just the absurdity of the panic, but its eerie relevance today. In an age of viral misinformation, it's a stark reminder of how easily fear can be weaponized and how quickly reality can blur when emotion overrides evidence. Now let's shift from imagined terrors to a very real disaster where nature's unpredictability turned deadly, the Great Molasses Flood of 1919. But while the Halifax slasher faded into history, its psychological fingerprints remained startlingly fresh. This bizarre episode wasn't just a quirky anomaly, it was a blueprint for how fear metastasizes in the modern world. Let's peel back the layers of mass panic to understand why our brains are so wired to believe the unbelievable. At its core, the Halifax hysteria was a textbook case of what psychologists call mass psychogenic illness. When stress levels spike, groups can subconsciously amplify minor events into full-blown crises. In 1938, the threat of war had already stretched nerves thin. A single misreported incident became kindling for collective anxiety, with each retelling distorting reality further. This wasn't malice, it's how our brains are built. Studies show humans prioritize potential threats over neutral information, an evolutionary hangover from when assuming snake saved lives more often than crying stick. The media's role acts as both mirror and magnifier. Newspapers in Halifax didn't just report fear, they monetized it. Sensational headlines triggered dopamine spikes in readers, creating a craving for more dramatic updates. Sound familiar? Modern algorithms exploit this same vulnerability, feeding us content that confirms our fears because outrage keeps us scrolling. A 2020 study from MIT found false news spread 6 times faster than truth on social media, not because we're gullible, but because threats feel urgent to share. What's chilling is how little the playbook has changed. Swap razors for vaccines or 5G towers, and you'll see identical patterns. The Salem witch trials, satanic panic of the 1980s, and QAnon conspiracy theories all follow the Halifax template. Ambiguous events plus high stress plus echo chambers equals explosive misinformation. Psychologists call this illusory truth effect. The more we hear something, the more plausible it feels, regardless of evidence. Yet there's hope in understanding these traps. After the slasher hoax, Halifax implemented stricter protocols for verifying crime. Reports a lesson today's platforms are slowly adopting with fact-check labels. Cognitive behavioral therapy techniques now teach individuals to spot emotional reasoning, where feelings masquerade as facts. Even simple pauses before sharing online can short-circuit panic cycles, something the 1930s townsfolk didn't have the tools to do. The real horror story isn't phantom attackers. It's realizing we're all susceptible to the same psychological traps that turned Halifax upside down. But awareness is our razor against fear's edge. As we step into our next tale, remember, the Great Molasses Flood was undeniably real, and its lessons about human error are just as sticky. Now, let's shift from the unseen terrors of mass panic to a disaster so viscerally real, it left Boston streets literally drowning in sweetness turned deadly. Picture this, a crisp January afternoon in 1919, the North End neighborhood bustling with dockworkers and children playing. Suddenly, a thunderous roar shakes the ground as a 50-foot-tall steel tank erupts, unleashing a 15-foot wave of molasses moving at 35 miles per hour. This wasn't a scene from a surreal nightmare. It was the Great Molasses Flood, a catastrophe where 2.3 million gallons of sticky syrup became an unstoppable force. The engineering behind this disaster reads like a checklist of hubris. Built in 1915 by the Purity Distilling Company, the tank was designed to hold molasses for rum production and industrial alcohol, a critical commodity during World War I. But shortcuts turned it into a ticking time bomb. The steel walls were criminally thin, just half an inch thick in spots, yet no engineer ever reviewed the blueprints. Workers reported leaks from day one, patching them with paint rather than proper repairs. When locals complained about groaning sounds from the tank, the company dismissed them, even passing out free molasses to sweeten community relations. Then, on January 15th, an unusual warm snap after a cold spell stressed the already weakened structure. At 12:30 p.m., the tank gave way with a sound witnesses compared to machine gun fire. The human toll was horrific. The molasses wave demolished buildings, crushed freight cars, and trapped horses like flies in amber. 21 people died, some suffocated under the viscous tide, others crushed by debris. Rescue efforts were nightmarish. The syrup's thickness made it impossible to wade through, and it hardened in the winter air like cement. For days, survivors pulled victims from the sticky wreckage while the harbor ran brown for months. Among the dead were 10-year-old Pascual Iantosca, who'd been fetching molasses for his mother, and firefighter George Lay, pinned against a wall until the weight of syrup drowned him. Legal fallout exposed shocking corporate negligence. Over 100 lawsuits culminated in one of Massachusetts' first class action cases, with victims alleging the tank was a known hazard. The company bizarrely claimed anarchists had bombed the tank, a theory disproven when investigators found rivets sheared clean by pressure. The trial dragged on for 6 years, finally ruling the tank's shoddy construction caused the disaster. This verdict paved the way for modern engineering regulations, including mandatory safety inspections and professional oversight. What makes the molasses flood unforgettable isn't just its absurdity, it's how perfectly it encapsulates the cost of cutting corners. From the whistleblowers ignored to the families grieving, this was a tragedy written in cut-rate steel and hubris. And as we'll see next, its legacy didn't just stain Boston streets, it reshaped how America thinks about industrial accountability. Moving beyond the immediate devastation, the Great Molasses Flood left a lasting imprint far stickier than the syrup itself. This catastrophe became a turning point in industrial safety, forcing a reckoning with practices that had prioritized profit over people. In the wake of the disaster, Massachusetts introduced some of the nation's first rigorous engineering certification laws. No longer could companies cut corners without oversight now. Licensed professionals had to approve designs, inspect materials, and sign off on construction. The lawsuits also set a precedent for corporate liability, proving that negligence could no longer be shrugged off with empty excuses. One of the most significant changes was the birth of modern building codes. The flood exposed how easily flawed structures could become death traps, leading to mandatory stress tests and material standards. Engineers began calculating load capacities with margins of safety, a concept that seems obvious today but was revolutionary after an era of guesswork. Even the concept of urban planning gained traction as cities realized haphazard industrial zones near homes invited disaster. The molasses tank had stood just 40 yards from a playground, a proximity unthinkable under today's regulations. But the legacy isn't just in rule books. Walk through Boston's North End today, and you'll find subtle nods to the tragedy. A small plaque near Copp's Hill marks the site, though locals swear you can still catch a whiff of molasses on the hottest summer days, a claim scientists attribute to fermented residue trapped in the harbor's sediment. The disaster also lives on in local slang, with old-timers joking about being slow as molasses in January, when someone's dragging their feet. Perhaps the most poignant memorial is the annual moment of silence held by descendants of victims, who gather every January 15th to read the names of the dead. Their quiet vigil ensures the flood isn't reduced to a quirky footnote, but remembered as a stark lesson in accountability. As we'll see in our next bizarre historical tale, sometimes progress comes only after tragedy leaves its mark, whether in sticky streets or laws that keep us safer. Now let's unravel one of history's most audacious claims, a theory so bold it questions whether nearly 3 centuries of the past were pure invention. This is the phantom time hypothesis, the idea that the years between 614 and 911 AD never actually happened. According to proponents like German historian Heribert Illig, these 297 years were inserted into the calendar by powerful figures, creating a fabricated timeline we now accept as real. Illig's argument hinges on peculiar gaps and inconsistencies. He points to the scarcity of reliable archaeological evidence from this period, along with what he calls suspiciously neat alignments in historical records. For example, the Gregorian calendar reform in the 16th century supposedly corrected a 10-day discrepancy caused by the Earth's orbit. But Illig calculated that the real drift should have been 13 days, suggesting 3 centuries might be missing. He also highlights oddly synchronized events like the rapid spread of Romanesque architecture as signs of historical tampering. But could an entire era really be invented? Mainstream scholars have dismantled the theory piece by piece. Carbon dating of artifacts from the so-called phantom centuries matches the established timeline, with everything from Viking ships to Chinese manuscripts providing physical proof. Astronomical records, like observations of solar eclipses documented by medieval scholars, align perfectly with the conventional calendar. Even tree ring data, which tracks climate changes year by year, shows no missing segments in the early Middle Ages. The most damning rebuttal comes from Byzantine and Islamic histories, which exist outside the European framework Illig questioned. These detailed chronicles, filled with battles, trade, and cultural milestones, seamlessly overlap the missing period. If the years between 614 and 911 AD were fake, how do we explain the intricate accounts of Arab scholars or the rise of the Tang dynasty in China? Ultimately, the phantom time hypothesis is a fascinating thought experiment, one that reveals more about our fascination with conspiracy than actual history. It challenges us to scrutinize how we reconstruct the past, but the weight of evidence leaves little room for doubt. As we'll see next, history's enigmas only grow stranger, from vanishing villages to signals from the stars. Now, let's turn our attention to the scholars who have taken on the phantom time hypothesis with hard evidence, dismantling its claims layer by layer. The academic world has not hesitated to challenge this radical theory, and their rebuttals are as compelling as they are conclusive. One of the strongest arguments against the hypothesis comes from archaeology. Excavations across Europe and beyond have uncovered artifacts and structures that fit neatly into the supposedly missing centuries. Take the Viking settlements in places like Dublin and York, where dendrochronology, the study of tree rings, has dated wooden structures to the 8th and 9th centuries with precision. These rings form an unbroken climate record, matching global patterns from the same period. There's simply no gap to explain away. Astronomy delivers another knockout blow. Medieval scholars from Baghdad to Constantinople meticulously recorded celestial events, including solar eclipses. For instance, the eclipse of 810 AD, described by Byzantine chroniclers, aligns perfectly with modern astronomical calculations. If nearly 300 years were fabricated, these observations would be impossibly out of sync. Even the motions of planets like Venus, tracked by both Mayan and Arab astronomers, show no discrepancies in the timeline. Then there's the paper trail. The Byzantine Empire's administrative records, tax rolls, and diplomatic correspondence span the phantom period without interruption. Meanwhile, in China, the Tang dynasty's historians documented everything from comet sightings to the construction of the Grand Canal events that overlap with Europe's timeline. Islamic scholars like al-Tabari wrote exhaustive histories covering these centuries, filled with verifiable names and battles. Coordinating such a vast conspiracy across continents and cultures would have been beyond even the most powerful medieval forgers. Critics also highlight logical flaws in Illig's math. While he fixated on the Gregorian calendar's 10-day adjustment, he overlooked simpler explanations, like errors in the Julian calendar's leap year calculations. Even Pope Gregory's astronomers admitted their correction was approximate, not exact. As for the rapid spread of Romanesque architecture, that's easily explained by trade routes and the influence of monastic networks, not time tampering. Perhaps the most telling detail is how the phantom time hypothesis crumbles under Occam's razor, the principle that the simplest explanation is usually correct. Inventing 3 centuries would require rewriting countless lives, records, and natural phenomena worldwide. The far likelier scenario, our timeline is intact, and the real mystery is why we're so drawn to theories that unravel it. With this puzzle laid to rest, our next stop is a tale woven into folklore where fact and legend blur in the story of the Pied Piper of Hamelin. Leaving behind the tangled theories of phantom centuries, we step into a story that has haunted imaginations for generations. The legend of the Pied Piper of Hamelin is one of those rare tales that seems to dance right on the edge of history and myth. The basic story is chillingly simple. In the year 1284, the German town of Hamelin was overrun by rats. A mysterious piper dressed in multicolored clothing offered to rid the town of its plague in exchange for payment. When the townspeople refused to pay him after he succeeded, he exacted a grotesque revenge, luring away 130 children with his enchanted pipe, never to be seen again. But how much of this is folklore, and how much might be rooted in real events? Historical records do confirm that something unusual happened in Hamelin around that time. A stained glass window from the 1300s, now lost but documented in old descriptions, depicted the piper leading children away. Even more telling is an inscription from the town's records that reads, "In the year 1284, on the day of Saints John and Paul, 130 children were taken from Hamelin by a piper." No rats are mentioned, just the disappearance. So if the piper was real, what was he really doing? One plausible theory ties the event to the medieval practice of recruiting settlers for Eastern Europe. In the 13th century, German lords actively encouraged migration to regions like Transylvania and Pomerania to cultivate new lands. Agents known as locators traveled from town to town, enticing young people with promises of opportunity, much like the piper's alluring music. Some historians suggest that children might have actually been young adults, lured away by one such recruiter, only to vanish into the hardships of colonial life or perish on the dangerous journey. Another grim possibility is disease. The phrase "led away" could be a euphemism for death, and the pied clothing might symbolize the vivid rash of illnesses like the bubonic plague. Yet the timeline doesn't quite match the Black Death swept Europe decades later. Alternatively, some link it to dancing manias or even a local tragedy like a landslide, where the piper represents nature's indiscriminate wrath. What's fascinating is how the rat element was likely added later. Rats didn't appear in versions of the story until the 1600s, possibly as a way to make the tale more dramatic for retellings. By then, the piper had morphed into a boogeyman figure, a warning about broken promises and the perils of deceit. Whatever the truth, the story endures because it taps into universal fears. It's a cautionary tale about the consequences of betrayal, the vulnerability of the young, and the haunting mystery of mass disappearances. And as we'll soon see, history has no shortage of those. Now let's follow the Pied Piper's melody as it echoes through centuries of culture, morphing from a grim medieval tale into a story that continues to captivate audiences today. The legend's evolution is a masterclass in how folklore adapts to the fears and fascinations of each new era. The Brothers Grimm played a pivotal role in cementing the piper's place in the modern imagination. When they included the tale in their 1816 collection of German folklore, they emphasized its darker edges: the rats, the betrayal, the haunting loss of children. Their version became the blueprint, but it was far from the last word. Writers and artists couldn't resist putting their own spin on the story. Robert Browning's 1842 poem, The Pied Piper of Hamelin, softened the horror with playful rhymes, making it a staple of children's literature despite its unsettling core. 20th century adaptations took even bolder liberties. Disney's 1933 Silly Symphony short turned the piper into a cheerful exterminator, complete with dancing rodents. Meanwhile, horror films like The Pied Piper 1972 leaned into the tale's nightmare potential, portraying the piper as a literal demon. Perhaps most chilling is the way the story has been repurposed in wartime propaganda. During World War II, British cartoons depicted Hitler as the piper, luring nations to destruction, a stark reminder of how easily the tale's themes of manipulation and consequences translate across contexts. Modern retellings often grapple with the story's ambiguity. Terry Pratchett's The Amazing Morris and his Educated Rodents offers a witty inversion, casting the rats as intelligent protagonists outsmarting a fraudulent piper. Video games like the Legend of Zelda series reference the piper in side quests, while your novels reimagine him as a time traveler or a misunderstood rebel. Even Psychology co-opted the metaphor Pied Piper syndrome, describes leaders who blind followers to danger through charisma. What makes this story so endlessly adaptable? Its simplicity hides layers of interpretation. Is the piper a villain, a victim, or an unknowable force? The lack of definitive answers invites reinvention. From cautionary tale to political allegory to children's romp, the legend persists because it holds up a mirror to whatever society fears most: broken promises, unchecked authority, or the price of greed. And as long as those themes resonate, the piper's flute will keep playing. Now let's shift our gaze from folklore to the skies, where one of the most violent cosmic events in recorded history left scientists puzzling for over a century. On June 30th, 1908, a fireball brighter than the sun exploded over the remote Tunguska region of Siberia with the force of 12 million tons of TNT. The blast flattened an estimated 80 million trees across 800 square miles, an area larger than modern-day London, snapping trunks like matchsticks in a perfect radial pattern. Eyewitnesses hundreds of miles away reported seeing a column of blue light, feeling scorching winds, and hearing detonations strong enough to knock people off their feet. Yet despite this cataclysmic power, no impact crater was ever found. Early expeditions to Tunguska faced near impossible conditions. It took 19 years for the first scientific team, led by Soviet mineralogist Leonid Kulik, to reach the epicenter through swampy terrain and surviving only on military rations. What they discovered defied expectations. Instead of a meteorite's remains, they found trees stripped bare and standing upright like telephone poles at ground zero, while those farther out lay in concentric circles of destruction. Kulik initially theorized it was an iron meteorite that vaporized on impact, but the absence of any metallic fragments left the mystery wide open. Modern simulations suggest the culprit was likely a stony asteroid or icy comet fragment 60 to 190 feet wide that disintegrated 3 to 6 miles above Earth. The airburst would have generated temperatures approaching 50,000 degrees Fahrenheit hotter than the sun's surface, followed by shock waves that registered on barometers worldwide. But competing theories keep the debate alive. Some researchers propose it was a chunk of antimatter or even a mini black hole, while others point to Nikola Tesla's secret energy transmission experiments as a possible man-made cause. The most tantalizing clue came in 2013, when Ukrainian scientists found microscopic mineral spheres in peat from the blast zone, potential fragments of the cosmic intruder itself. What makes Tunguska uniquely troubling is that it happened in one of the most sparsely populated places on Earth. Had the explosion occurred just 4 hours later, the rotation of the planet would have placed it directly over St. Petersburg, potentially killing millions. This near miss underscores why NASA and other space agencies now invest heavily in planetary defense systems like the DART mission, which successfully altered an asteroid's orbit in 2022. Yet for all our advances, Tunguska remains a humbling reminder that the universe still holds surprises capable of rewriting human history in an instant. But here's the unsettling truth: we've been lucky. While the Tunguska event remains the most powerful cosmic impact in modern history, it was far from unique. Scientists now estimate that asteroids capable of leveling cities strike Earth roughly every 100 to 200 years. The difference today: we finally have the technology to spot them before they arrive. Consider this: the same year Tunguska exploded over Siberia, the largest telescope in America could barely resolve features on Mars. Fast forward to today, where automated sky surveys like Pan-STARRS in Hawaii and the upcoming Vera Rubin Observatory scan millions of celestial objects nightly. These systems use algorithms to detect even faint moving dots that could signify an approaching threat. In 2020, one such system spotted a car-sized asteroid mere hours before it harmlessly burned up over Africa, proof that early warning is now possible. Yet detection is only half the battle. The real test comes in deflecting a confirmed threat. That's where missions like NASA DART come into play. In 2022, this refrigerator-sized spacecraft intentionally crashed into a harmless asteroid called Dimorphos, altering its orbit by over 30 minutes. This first-ever planetary defense test proved we could nudge an asteroid off course given enough lead time. The European Space Agency now plans to follow up with its HERA mission to study the crater left by DART, refining our understanding of asteroid composition and behavior. But what if we only had months, or worse, weeks to prepare? That's the nightmare scenario keeping astronomers awake. Tunguska-sized objects are small enough to slip past telescopes until they're alarmingly close. For these, scientists propose last-minute solutions like deploying nuclear explosives to fragment the asteroid, though the risks of radioactive fallout remain. Others suggest painting one side of the asteroid white to let sunlight gently push it off course via the Yarkovsky effect, a slow but fuel-free method. Perhaps the most sobering lesson from Tunguska is how unprepared we remain. Only about 40% of near-Earth asteroids larger than 140 meters big enough to devastate a continent have been catalogued as of 2024. And smaller objects like the 20-meter Chelyabinsk meteor that injured over 1,500 people in Russia in 2013 still arrive unannounced. The silver lining: international cooperation is growing. NASA Planetary Defense Coordination Office now works with agencies worldwide, while the United Nations has protocols for asteroid threat responses. Even amateur astronomers contribute through programs like NASA Asteroid Hunters, because in the end, Tunguska taught us that planetary defense isn't just about technology, it's about humanity working together to protect our shared home. And that may be the most important lesson of all. Now, shifting our focus from cosmic threats to a chilling mystery here on Earth, we arrive at one of history's most baffling wilderness tragedies, the Dyatlov Pass Incident. In January 1959, a group of 9 experienced hikers ventured into the icy expanse of Russia's Ural Mountains. None of them would return alive. The details uncovered later were nothing short of horrifying. The hikers' tent was found torn open from the inside, as if they'd fled in sheer panic. Their footprints led into the freezing darkness, some barefoot, others clad only in socks. Days later, their bodies were scattered across the snowy terrain, some with crushed ribs, one with a fractured skull, and another missing their tongue and eyes. Stranger still, tests later revealed traces of radiation on their clothing. So what could have driven these skilled outdoorsmen to abandon their tent in sub-zero temperatures? The initial Soviet investigation blamed an unknown compelling force, a phrase that only deepened the mystery. Over the decades, theories have ranged from the plausible to the outlandish. Some point to avalanches, suggesting a sudden slide forced them to flee, while others propose infrasound low-frequency noises from wind that can induce panic. But these explanations struggle to account for the internal injuries or the radiation. Military experiments are another angle. The region was near nuclear testing sites, and some speculate the hikers stumbled upon a secret operation leading to a lethal cover-up. Others suggest they encountered a rogue missile test or even experimental weapons. Yet no declassified documents have ever confirmed this. Then there's the paranormal camp, pointing to eerie lights seen in the sky that night, possibly linked to UFOs or even the legendary Yeti. While these ideas capture the imagination, they lack concrete evidence. Recent scientific studies have leaned toward natural causes. In 2021, researchers proposed a rare slab avalanche triggered by katabatic winds could explain the injuries and the frantic escape. But skeptics argue the slope was too gentle for such an event. The Dyatlov Pass incident remains a haunting puzzle, a reminder of how nature, or perhaps something else, can turn deadly in ways we still don't fully understand. What's clear is that this case continues to captivate because it defies easy answers, standing as one of history's most enigmatic tragedies. Turning the page on decades of speculation, new investigations into the Dyatlov Pass incident have breathed fresh life into this cold case. In 2020, Russian authorities reopened the official inquiry, applying modern forensic techniques to evidence that had been sitting untouched for over 60 years. Their findings added intriguing layers to the mystery. Advanced snow and wind simulations suggested a small avalanche could have struck the tent, explaining the hikers' sudden flight. But crucially, the report admitted this didn't fully account for all the injuries, particularly the internal trauma, that looked more like the result of extreme pressure than blunt force. Fueling the conspiracy fire, independent researchers uncovered declassified Cold War documents showing Soviet military aircraft were conducting parachute mine tests in the region that winter. These experimental weapons created shockwaves capable of inflicting internal injuries eerily similar to those found on the hikers. While no smoking gun ties these tests directly to the incident, the timing and location raise unsettling questions. The internet age has amplified wilder theories too. Online sleuths now pore over enhanced versions of the hikers' final photos, pointing to strange light formations in the sky and what some claim are humanoid shadows near the campsite. Mainstream scientists dismiss these as lens flares and pareidolia, the mind-seeing patterns where none exist, but such debates keep the case trending on forums worldwide. Perhaps most strikingly, a 2022 study published in Nature Communications proposed a radical natural explanation. Researchers demonstrated how hurricane-force katabatic winds, downslope gusts unique to mountainous terrain, could have created infrasound waves at frequencies known to induce terror and disorientation in humans. This theory elegantly ties together the panicked escape and even the radiation traces, as the winds might have stirred up radioactive dust from nearby mining sites. Yet even the study's authors concede it doesn't explain every anomaly. What makes Dyatlov Pass endure isn't just the unanswered questions, but how it mirrors our deepest fears. It's a Rorschach test of the modern age. Skeptics see a tragic hiking accident, conspiracy theorists glimpse government secrets, and others wonder if we're still missing something fundamental about our world. As forensic technology advances, one thing seems certain: this frozen enigma will continue to thaw new theories for generations to come. As we pivot from the chilling mysteries of Dyatlov Pass, let's turn our gaze upward to the cosmos and one of its most tantalizing enigmas, the WOW signal. On an ordinary August night in 1977, a radio telescope at Ohio State University's Big Ear Observatory picked up something extraordinary. For 72 seconds, a narrowband radio signal blazed across the frequencies, so strong and seemingly artificial that astronomer Jerry Amon circled it on the printout and scribbled, "Wow," in the margin, giving the signal its iconic name. This wasn't just background cosmic noise. The signal matched the exact frequency that scientists had predicted extraterrestrials might use to communicate, 1420 MHz, a quiet band where natural cosmic interference is minimal. What made the WOW signal so electrifying was its specificity. It originated from the direction of the constellation Sagittarius, near a star system called Chi Sagittarii, and bore all the hallmarks of an intentional transmission. Unlike natural radio emissions from pulsars or quasars, which scatter across multiple frequencies, this signal was laser-focused, a hallmark of engineered technology. SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, had its first real candidate for alien contact. But then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the signal vanished. Despite decades of follow-up scans by telescopes worldwide, including modern arrays like the Allen Telescope Array, it was never heard again. theories about its origin range from the mundane to the mind-bending. Some scientists suggest it could have been a reflected signal from human-made space debris, like a satellite or rocket booster, though no known objects match the timing or trajectory. Others propose it was a natural cosmic phenomenon we simply don't yet understand, perhaps a never-before-seen type of interstellar plasma burst. Then there's the tantalizing possibility that it was indeed a deliberate transmission from an advanced civilization, one that either stopped broadcasting or whose signal was intercepted only briefly as Earth moved through its beam. What keeps the WOW signal alive in scientific and popular imagination isn't just its mystery, but what it represents: a fleeting whisper in the dark that challenges our assumptions about loneliness in the universe. Projects like Breakthrough Listen now scan millions of star systems with far more sensitive equipment, hoping to catch another such signal. Meanwhile, the original WOW printout hangs in a museum, a silent testament to the enduring human quest to answer one profound question: are we truly alone? Moving from the tantalizing mystery of the WOW signal, let's explore how this singular event reshaped humanity's quest to find signs of life beyond our planet. The WOW signal wasn't just a blip on a printout. It became a rallying cry for scientists determined to scan the cosmos for answers. Today, initiatives like Breakthrough Listen, launched in 2016 with funding from billionaire Yuri Milner, represent the most ambitious effort yet to detect extraterrestrial intelligence. Armed with cutting-edge telescopes like the Green Bank Telescope in West Virginia and the Parkes Observatory in Australia, the project analyzes millions of radio frequencies across vast swaths of the galaxy, dwarfing the capabilities of the 1970s-era Big Ear telescope. But why does the search for alien life hinge on radio signals? The logic is surprisingly straightforward. Radio waves can travel immense distances through space with minimal interference, making them the universe's most reliable shouting method for civilizations trying to announce their presence. Breakthrough Listen doesn't just aim to replicate the WOW signal's detection, it refines the hunt by targeting nearby star systems with Earth-like planets, such as those in the TRAPPIST-1 system, where 7 rocky worlds orbit a cool dwarf star. The project also scans for laser pulses, another potential beacon of advanced technology. Yet decades of silence since 1977 have forced scientists to confront sobering questions. Are we listening wrong, or is the universe truly empty of neighbors? Skeptics argue that the odds of detecting alien life are vanishingly small. The Fermi paradox, named after physicist Enrico Fermi, poses a haunting contradiction. If the universe is teeming with life, why haven't we found any evidence? Some explanations suggest that advanced civilizations might self-destruct before making contact, or that they communicate via technologies we can't yet comprehend, like neutrino messaging. Others propose a darker zoo hypothesis, where extraterrestrials deliberately avoid us, observing humanity like a cosmic wildlife preserve. Yet optimists counter that we've barely scratched the surface. Less than 1% of our galaxy's stars have been thoroughly surveyed, and new tools are constantly expanding the search. The upcoming Square Kilometre Array, a global network of radio telescopes set to launch in 2028, will scan the sky with unprecedented sensitivity. Meanwhile, Breakthrough Listen's data is publicly available, inviting amateur astronomers and AI algorithms to join the hunt, because the next WOW signal might be hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right pair of eyes or ears to spot it. The enduring fascination with the WOW signal isn't just about solving a 45-year-old puzzle. It's about what the signal symbolizes: humanity's refusal to accept cosmic loneliness. Whether the next detection comes tomorrow or a century from now, the search itself reaffirms a profound truth: we're a species wired to look up and wonder. And perhaps one day the universe will wonder back. Now, shifting our gaze from the cosmic mysteries of the WOW signal to a terrestrial enigma that has baffled scholars for centuries, we arrive at one of history's most perplexing riddles, the Voynich Manuscript. This 15th century book, named after the Polish book dealer Wilfrid Voynich, who acquired it in 1912, is an artifact wrapped in layers of impenetrable secrecy. Its 240 pages are filled with an unknown script, a flowing, alien alphabet that resembles no known language, paired with surreal illustrations of unidentifiable plants, astrological diagrams, and nude women bathing in oddly interconnected tubes. The manuscript's very existence defies explanation. Is it an elaborate medical treatise, an alchemist's notebook, or perhaps the work of an ingenious hoaxer? Efforts to crack the code have spanned generations, uniting linguists, cryptographers, and even wartime codebreakers. During World War II, British intelligence recruited experts who had deciphered Nazi codes to tackle the Voynich, hoping their skills could penetrate its mysteries. They failed. In the 1970s, a team at the National Security Agency applied supercomputers to the task, analyzing letter frequencies and patterns, but the text resisted every statistical assault. Fast forward to the 21st century, and artificial intelligence has entered the fray. In 2019, researchers at the University of Alberta trained an algorithm to compare the manuscript structure to hundreds of known languages, suggesting it might be encoded Hebrew, but even this lead dissolved under closer scrutiny, leaving the text as inscrutable as ever. The illustrations deepen the puzzle. Detailed drawings of plants with no known earthly counterparts suggest either a lost botanical tradition or pure fantasy. Some pages feature celestial charts that don't match any recognized astronomical system, while others depict women holding star-like objects in green-tinted pools, sparking theories about medieval gynecology or even esoteric fertility rituals. Carbon dating confirms the book's age, ruling out modern forgery, yet its purpose remains maddeningly opaque. Could it be a cipher meant to conceal heretical knowledge, or simply the ravings of a troubled mind? What makes the Voynich Manuscript endure as a cultural obsession isn't just its resistance to decoding, it's the tantalizing possibility that an answer exists at all. Unlike outright hoaxes, the manuscript's internal consistency hints at a deliberate, structured language, fueling hope that one day the right key will turn. Until then, it stands as a testament to history's stubborn refusal to reveal all its secrets, inviting each new generation to stare into its cryptic pages and wonder. Turning from the manuscript's cryptic text to its equally baffling illustrations, we find ourselves in a botanical labyrinth. The Voynich Manuscript's plants defy identification, blending familiar features in impossible ways. Some leaves twist into spirals unseen in nature, while roots morph into intricate geometric patterns. Scholars have attempted to match these drawings to real species, suggesting everything from New World flora imported to Europe after Columbus to fantastical interpretations of medicinal herbs. Yet no convincing parallels exist, leaving us to ponder whether these plants were inventions, badly copied from older texts, or perhaps representations of now extinct species. The language itself presents a paradox that has tormented linguists for decades. Statistical analysis reveals the writing follows Zipf's law, a pattern found in all human languages where certain words appear frequently while others are rare. This suggests the text isn't random gibberish, but attempts to link it to known alphabets fail spectacularly. Some theorize it uses a cipher so complex that even modern computing power can't crack it, while others propose it's an artificial language created before such systems were formally documented. The most tantalizing hypothesis suggests the manuscript employs verbose cipher, where common Latin words were replaced with elaborate symbols, a method used by 16th century cryptographers. Adding to the mystery are the manuscript's astrological sections, where nymph-like figures hold crescent moons and stars within circular diagrams that resemble but don't match medieval zodiacs. These pages may represent an unknown cosmological system or perhaps encrypted astronomical data. Some researchers point to the green-tinted, biological illustrations, speculating they depict water-powered reproductive systems centuries before such concepts entered mainstream science. Could this be evidence of lost knowledge or merely the fanciful doodles of an imaginative scribe? What keeps scholars returning to this puzzle isn't just its age or complexity, but the haunting possibility that it might be both a hoax and a genuine artifact simultaneously. The care invested in its creation suggests purposeful design, yet the content resists all logical interpretation. Whether it's an alchemist's coded notebook, a Renaissance-era art experiment, or something far stranger, the Voynich Manuscript remains history's most beautiful locked door with no clear key in sight. As we continue our journey through history's strangest events, this enigmatic book stands as a reminder that some puzzles refuse to surrender their secrets, no matter how fiercely we interrogate them. Now let's step into another enigma that blurs the line between history and legend, the baffling case of the Green Children of Woolpit. This strange incident unfolded in 12th century England, in the small village of Woolpit, where residents stumbled upon two children with skin tinted an unnatural shade of green. Their appearance alone would have been startling enough, but their story grew even stranger when they spoke in a language no one could recognize, and they refused to eat anything except raw beans. According to medieval chroniclers, the brother and sister were discovered near a wolf pit, a trap used for hunting which gave the village its name. The boy, frail and sickly, succumbed to illness not long after their arrival, but the girl survived. As she gradually adapted to her new surroundings, her skin lost its green hue and she learned to speak English. When questioned about their origins, she described coming from a twilight world where the sun never rose, a place she called St. Martin's Land. Some interpretations suggest this could reference an underground realm or even a parallel dimension, fueling wild speculation about supernatural explanations. Historians, however, have proposed more grounded theories. One compelling argument ties the children to Flemish immigrants who faced persecution during the reign of King Henry II. Flemish communities had settled in eastern England but were violently expelled after a political uprising. The children might have been refugees, their green skin the result of malnutrition, specifically chloroses, a condition caused by dietary deficiencies that can give skin a greenish pallor. Their strange language could have been a Flemish dialect unfamiliar to the villagers, and their land without sun might symbolize the dense forests where they hid during their escape. Yet the extraterrestrial angle persists in popular culture. Could the children have been accidentally transported from another world, their green skin a biological adaptation to a different environment? Some point to their aversion to conventional food as evidence of an otherworldly physiology, though skeptics counter that trauma or cultural shock could explain their behavior just as easily. Folklore, too, offers parallels. Stories of green-skinned beings appear in myths across Europe, from fairy lore to tales of subterranean dwellers. The Woolpit children might have been folded into these older narratives, their real origins obscured by time and retelling. What makes this case uniquely haunting is its dual nature. It's documented in historical records yet feels steeped in the uncanny. Whether a tale of human hardship, a cultural misunderstanding, or something far more mysterious, the Green Children of Woolpit remain one of history's most curious footnotes. As we peel back the layers of this medieval mystery, it challenges us to weigh the boundaries between fact and folklore. Next, we'll encounter another event where reality seems to twist into the surreal, proving that history's strangest chapters often resist simple explanations. Turning our attention to the broader tapestry of human storytelling, the tale of the Green Children of Woolpit finds echoes in legends across cultures and centuries. Stories of unusual beings emerging from hidden realms appear worldwide, blurring the line between collective memory and imaginative folklore. Consider the Hawaiian tradition of the Menehune, a mythical race of small-statured people said to dwell in forests, emerging only at night to build astonishing structures. Like the Woolpit children's Land Without Sun, these figures are tied to shadowy, half-remembered places just beyond human perception. Similarly, Irish folklore speaks of the Taos Hum, supernatural beings who inhabit an invisible parallel world, occasionally crossing into ours, often with unsettling consequences. These recurring motifs suggest a universal human fascination with thresholds between worlds, whether symbolic or literal. Historians face a delicate task when disentangling such accounts. The Woolpit children's story, recorded by credible medieval chroniclers like William of Newburgh and Ralph of Coggeshall, resists easy categorization. Unlike purely mythical tales, it's anchored in a specific time and place, with details that hint at real events beneath the layers of embellishment. This duality invites us to ask, could other global legends also contain kernels of truth? Take the Navajo Noldlushii, or skinwalkers, figures often dismissed as superstition. Some scholars propose these stories may reflect encounters with shamanic traditions or even psychological phenomena like mass hysteria. The same analytical lens applied to Woolpit, separating cultural context from possible historical roots, can reveal surprising connections. Intriguingly, malnutrition as an explanation for the children's green skin finds parallels in other historical accounts. During the Great Famine in 9th century France, chronicles describe starving peasants developing greenish complexions from consuming unripe grain and toxic plants. This biological reality may have fueled legends like Germany's Kornmum, a ghostly green-hued harvest spirit said to punish those who waste food. Such overlaps show how folklore often emerges from shared human experiences: hunger, displacement, and the struggle to explain the inexplicable. Yet the Woolpit account stands apart in one key way: its lack of moralizing. Unlike cautionary tales warning against venturing into forbidden forests or angering spirits, the Green Children's story is curiously neutral. This neutrality lends it an air of authenticity, as if medieval scribes were documenting rather than moralizing. Modern historians often favor the Flemish refugee theory precisely because it aligns with known 12th century upheavals, like the purge of Flemish mercenaries after Henry II's conflict with Thomas Becket. The children's description of a twilight land could metaphorically represent the fog-shrouded marshlands where Flemish exiles hid, a detail later mythologized. The challenge, then, isn't dismissing such stories as pure fantasy, but probing why certain details persist across cultures. From Japan's Kappa water-dwelling creatures with otherworldly traits to Australia's Yowie, a hairy hominid said to emerge from wilderness, these narratives often share motifs of beings existing just beyond human understanding. The Woolpit tale endures because it sits at that tantalizing intersection, a documented mystery that invites us to question how history and imagination intertwine. As we move forward, this interplay of record and legend will surface again in our next encounter, one where fear and confusion gripped an entire city, proving that reality can sometimes outpace even the wildest folklore. Now, shifting from folklore to a moment when real-world fear took hold of an entire city, we arrive at one of the most bewildering events of World War II, the so-called Battle of Los Angeles. In the early hours of February 25, 1942, just months after the attack on Pearl Harbor, air raid sirens wailed across Los Angeles. Searchlights swept the skies as anti-aircraft guns unleashed a deafening barrage, firing over 1,400 shells at nothing, or at least nothing that left any trace. Witnesses reported seeing a slow-moving object hovering over the city, some describing it as a balloon or blimp, others insisting it was a metallic, disc-shaped craft. The chaos lasted for hours, with shells raining shrapnel across neighborhoods, damaging buildings, and even causing civilian deaths, 3 from heart attacks and 2 in car accidents during the blackout. By dawn, the skies were empty, leaving only questions. wartime paranoia played an undeniable role. After Pearl Harbor, the West Coast braced for a Japanese attack. Just a day before the incident, a submarine had shelled an oil field near Santa Barbara. So when radar operators detected an unidentified blip approaching LA, the military assumed the worst. Yet no wreckage was found, no enemy aircraft identified. Officials first claimed it was a false alarm triggered by weather balloons or nerves, then later suggested it might have been a stray civilian plane. The press, however, latched onto stranger theories. One plausible explanation lies in Japan's Fugo balloon bombs, hydrogen balloons carrying incendiary devices designed to drift across the Pacific on jet streams. Hundreds reached North America, starting fires as far east as Michigan. Though most were ineffective, their existence was real, and the U.S. government suppressed news of them to avoid panic. Could one have triggered the LA alert? Skeptics note that these balloons typically flew much higher than the object described that night. Then there's the UFO angle. Decades later, declassified documents revealed that military personnel gave conflicting accounts. Some swore they saw formations of aircraft, others described a single, otherworldly craft. The incident even made headlines as a potential extraterrestrial encounter, fueled by a now iconic photo published in the Los Angeles Times, showing searchlights converging on a vague, saucer-like shape. Experts later dismissed it as a lens flare or a misidentified weather balloon, but the mystery endures. What makes this event so compelling is how it encapsulates the era's terror and uncertainty. Wartime hysteria, cutting-edge but imperfect radar technology, and the government's tight control of information all collided that night. Whether it was a rogue balloon, a case of mass hallucination, or something even stranger, the Battle of Los Angeles remains a haunting reminder of how fear can rewrite reality. And as we'll soon see, this dance between perception and truth takes an even darker turn in our next chapter. A tragedy where rumors of an unseen attacker spiraled into full-blown hysteria, proving that sometimes the most dangerous threats are the ones we imagine. Now, let's peel back the layers of secrecy surrounding the Battle of Los Angeles and examine how the government's response, or lack thereof, only deepened the mystery. In the days following the chaos, officials scrambled to downplay the incident, releasing a series of contradictory statements that left the public more confused than ever. Initially, the U.S. military blamed the panic on war nerves and misidentified weather balloons. Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox even called it a false alarm, a claim that rang hollow to Angelenos who'd watched shells explode over their homes. But just hours later, Secretary of War Henry Stimson offered a radically different take, suggesting a possible enemy raid involving 1 to 5 unidentified aircraft. This flip-flopping fueled suspicions of a cover-up, especially when no wreckage or enemy pilots were ever found. The media, meanwhile, had a field day. Newspapers like the Los Angeles Times splashed dramatic photos of searchlights crisscrossing the night sky, while others hinted at extraterrestrial involvement. Sensational headlines turned the event into a cultural touchstone, blending wartime anxiety with budding UFO lore. Even President Roosevelt faced questions, though his administration quietly classified key documents citing national security. Decades later, declassified files revealed just how muddled the military's own reports were. Some radar operators insisted they'd tracked legitimate targets, while others admitted technical glitches might have created phantom blips. The most tantalizing records include eyewitness accounts from trained personnel describing silver discs maneuvering in ways no known aircraft could. Yet these were buried under layers of redaction, leaving researchers to piece together fragments like a jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing. What's most striking is how the government's handling of the incident reflects a broader pattern. In times of crisis, authorities often prioritize calming the public over transparency, sometimes at the cost of the truth. The Battle of Los Angeles became a Rorschach test, seen as proof of extraterrestrials by UFO enthusiasts, a military blunder by skeptics, and a cautionary tale about the fog of war by historians. And this dance between fact and speculation doesn't end here. Up next, we'll explore how another phantom threat, this time a slasher who never existed, sent an entire town into a spiral of fear, proving that sometimes the stories we tell ourselves are more dangerous than reality. But before we dive into the panic of the Halifax slasher, let's rewind the clock even further, back to a discovery so astonishing it rewrote our understanding of ancient technology. Picture this, a corroded lump of bronze pulled from a 2,000-year-old shipwreck off the coast of Greece in 1901. At first glance, it seemed like scrap. But when archaeologists peered inside, they uncovered the Antikythera mechanism, a device so advanced it's been called the world's first analog computer. This intricate machine, no larger than a shoebox, was packed with precisely cut gears, some with teeth just a millimeter wide, arranged in a system that could predict lunar eclipses, track planetary movements, and even chart the dates of the Olympic Games. Imagine the shock of realizing that ancient Greeks, over 2 millennia ago, had engineered technology rivaling the complexity of an 18th-century Swiss clock. How did it work? The mechanism used a series of interlocking bronze gears to model the erratic motions of celestial bodies, accounting for variables like the moon's elliptical orbit. Turn a hand crank and dials would display the positions of the sun, moon, and 5 known planets against a backdrop of zodiac signs. It even included a tiny rotating ball, half white and half black, to show the moon's phases in real time. This wasn't just a tool, it was a cosmic calculator blending astronomy, mathematics, and artistry in a way that feels almost alien compared to the simpler devices of its era. Yet here's the real mystery: why did such brilliance vanish? After the Antikythera mechanism's creation around 80 to 60 BC, similar technology doesn't reappear in historical records for over 1,000 years. Some scholars blame the collapse of the Greco-Roman world, where wars and lost knowledge fractured scientific progress. Others suggest these devices were rare luxuries owned by elite temples or scholars, their secrets dying with them. Fragments of writings hint that Archimedes may have designed similar machines, but without surviving examples, we're left with tantalizing gaps. Modern imaging techniques have peeled back layers of corrosion to reveal hidden inscriptions. A user manual etched in Greek explaining how to read the celestial predictions. But the mechanism's full story remains half-buried, much like the shipwreck that preserved it. Was it a one-off marvel or evidence of a forgotten technological golden age? Either way, the Antikythera mechanism forces us to rethink history's timeline, proving that the past might hold far more surprises than we've dared to imagine. And just when you think history can't get any stranger, along comes a tale of mass hysteria sparked by a threat that never existed. But that's a story for another moment. Now, let's widen the lens and see how the Antikythera mechanism fits into the bigger puzzle of ancient ingenuity. It's easy to assume technology marches forward in a straight line, but history loves to throw curveballs. Take the Roman concrete used to build harbors 2,000 years ago, structures that still stand today. While modern concrete crumbles in decades, scientists only recently discovered its secret: volcanic ash mixed with seawater, creating a self-healing mineral that repairs cracks. The ancients weren't just lucky, they were brilliant materials scientists. Then there's the Baghdad battery, a set of clay jars from 2,000 years ago containing iron rods and copper cylinders. When filled with vinegar or lemon juice, they generate a small electric charge. Were these primitive batteries used for electroplating jewelry, or were they part of some lost medical device? We may never know, but they challenge the idea that electricity was harnessed only in modern times. Or consider the precision of the Nazca lines in Peru, massive geoglyphs carved into the desert floor between 500 BC and 500 AD. Some stretch over 9 miles in perfectly straight lines, while others form intricate animal shapes visible only from the air. Without drones or satellites, how did the Nazca people achieve such accuracy? Archaeologists suspect they used simple grids and ropes, but the scale still boggles the mind. Even older is the Indus Valley's plumbing. Around 2500 BC, cities like Mohenjo-Daro had advanced sewer systems with covered drains and home toilets, amenities Europe wouldn't see again until the 19th century. Their standardized bricks and urban planning suggest a level of civic engineering that rivals modern cities. These inventions share a common thread. They defy the myth that older means primitive. The Antikythera mechanism wasn't a fluke. It was part of a tapestry of innovation across cultures, much of which was lost to war, disaster, or simply the passage of time. Maybe the real mystery isn't how the ancients built these marvels, but why we ever underestimated them in the first place. And just when you think history's surprises can't get any wilder, wait until you hear about a town where accusations of witchcraft spiraled into deadly chaos. But that's a tale for another moment. Now, shifting our focus from mysterious inventions to a darker chapter in human history, let's journey to Salem, Massachusetts in the year 1692. Imagine a small Puritan village gripped by fear, where whispers of witchcraft turned neighbor against neighbor and ultimately led to the deaths of 20 innocent people. The Salem witch trials remain one of history's most chilling examples of mass hysteria, a perfect storm of superstition, religious fervor, and social paranoia. It all began when 2 young girls, 9-year-old Betty Paris and 11-year-old Abigail Williams, began suffering from violent fits, screaming uncontrollably and contorting their bodies in ways that defied explanation. With no medical knowledge to account for their behavior, the town's physician diagnosed them as under an evil hand. Soon, other girls in the village exhibited similar symptoms, and under pressure, they accused 3 women, Tituba, an enslaved woman from the Caribbean, Sarah Good, a homeless beggar, and Sarah Osborne, an elderly widow, of bewitching them. What followed was a cascade of accusations fueled by fear. The trials were anything but fair. Spectral evidence, testimony that the accused had appeared in dreams or visions to torment their victims, was deemed admissible in court. Confessions were coerced, and those who maintained their innocence faced execution. By the time the hysteria subsided, 19 people had been hanged. 1 man was crushed to death under heavy stones for refusing to plead, and countless others languished in jail. But what really caused this outburst of terror? Some historians point to the strict, repressive nature of Puritan society, where any deviation from religious norms was seen as a threat. Others suggest bitter rivalries over land and wealth played a role, as accusations often conveniently targeted unpopular or vulnerable figures. Then there's the ergot poisoning theory, a fascinating scientific angle. Ergot is a fungus that grows on damp rye, a staple crop in Salem at the time. When ingested, it can cause hallucinations, muscle spasms, and even the sensation of crawling skin, symptoms eerily similar to those described by the afflicted girls. Could a natural toxin have ignited the panic? The trials ended as abruptly as they began, leaving a legacy of shame and reflection. In the centuries since, Salem has transformed from a place of persecution to a symbol of caution, a reminder of what happens when fear overrides reason. And yet, the echoes of this tragedy still resonate today, in modern witch hunts fueled by misinformation and fear, but that's a conversation for another time. For now, let's turn our attention to another mystery that blurs the line between history and legend. One that involves an entire village vanishing without a trace. Now, as we step back from the horrors of Salem, it's worth asking, how did this dark chapter shape the world that followed? The Salem witch trials weren't just a fleeting moment of panic. They left a profound mark on American law and culture, sparking changes that still ripple through our justice system today. One of the most significant legacies was the rejection of spectral evidence, the idea that dreams or visions could justify a guilty verdict. In the years after the trials, lawmakers and judges recognized the danger of relying on such unprovable claims. This shift laid the groundwork for modern legal standards, emphasizing tangible proof over hearsay or superstition. It's why courts today demand physical evidence, witness testimony, and rigorous cross-examination. The tragedy of Salem became a cautionary tale about the perils of unchecked fear in the courtroom. But the echoes of Salem go beyond legal reforms. The trials exposed how easily communities can fracture under pressure, turning suspicion into violence. Throughout history, we've seen this pattern repeat, whether during the Red Scare of the 1950s, when fear of communism led to blacklists and ruined careers, or in modern-day moral panics fueled by social media. The mechanics are eerily similar: a spark of fear, a rush to blame, and a refusal to question the frenzy until it's too late. Even the term witch hunt has endured as a cultural shorthand. Politicians, activists, and journalists use it to describe any unjust persecution, from McCarthyism to online cancel culture. Yet this comparison isn't perfect. While Salem's victims were undeniably innocent, the phrase is sometimes misused to evade accountability. That tension between legitimate calls for justice and the dangers of mob mentality is a debate still very much alive today. Perhaps the most haunting lesson of Salem is how ordinary people, not monsters, carried out the atrocities. The accusers weren't villains in some distant past. They were neighbors, parents, even children, people who genuinely believed they were protecting their community. That's what makes the trials so unsettling. They force us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Under the right conditions, any society can descend into cruelty. So how do we guard against modern witch hunts? Skepticism, empathy, and above all, a commitment to due process even when emotions run high, because history doesn't just repeat itself, it whispers warnings if we're willing to listen. And with that in mind, let's turn to a mystery where the line between fact and folklore blurs even further: the strange case of an entire village that vanished into thin air. Now, let's shift gears to a tale that feels ripped straight from a science fiction novel, yet some insist it's rooted in reality. The Philadelphia experiment is one of the most enduring urban legends of the 20th century, blending cutting-edge science with a dash of Cold War intrigue. The story goes like this. In October of 1943, the U.S. Navy allegedly conducted a top-secret experiment aboard the USS Eldridge, a destroyer escort docked in Philadelphia. Using principles from Einstein's so-called unified field theory, a theoretical framework that aimed to combine electromagnetism and gravity, scientists supposedly made the ship invisible to both radar and the naked eye. Witnesses claimed the vessel briefly vanished, teleported to Norfolk, Virginia, and then reappeared in Philadelphia, all in a matter of minutes, but the cost was horrifying. Sailors were said to have been fused into the ship's hull, driven insane, or even spontaneously combusted. So where did this bizarre story come from? The earliest accounts trace back to a single man, Carl Allen, also known as Carlos Allende. In the 1950s, Allen sent a series of rambling letters to astronomer Morris Jessup, claiming to have witnessed the experiment firsthand. He described it as a catastrophic failure, shrouded in government cover-ups. Jessup, already fascinated by UFOs and fringe science, took the claims seriously enough to include them in his book. From there, the legend snowballed, fueled by Cold War anxieties and a growing appetite for conspiracy theories. But here's where fact and fiction diverge. The U.S. Navy has repeatedly denied the experiment ever took place. Records show the USS Eldridge wasn't even in Philadelphia on the alleged date. And while Einstein did work on unified field theory, he never collaborated with the military on such a project. As for the terrifying side effects, they bear a striking resemblance to sci-fi tropes of the era, suggesting the story may have been embellished or entirely fabricated. That hasn't stopped believers from digging deeper. Some point to declassified documents showing the Navy was indeed experimenting with degaussing, a technique to make ships less detectable to magnetic mines. Could this mundane reality have been twisted into a tale of invisibility? Others cite alleged veteran testimonies, though these accounts are often second-hand or unverifiable. Meanwhile, skeptics argue the entire story is a hoax stitched together from misunderstood science and post-war paranoia. What makes the Philadelphia experiment so compelling isn't just the mystery, it's what it reveals about us. In an age of atomic secrets and UFO sightings, people were primed to believe the government was hiding unimaginable technologies. Even today, the legend persists, popping up in films, books, and endless online debates. It's a reminder of how easily science fiction can bleed into collective memory, especially when the truth feels just out of reach. So was the Philadelphia experiment real? The evidence says no, but the fact that we're still talking about it decades later, that's undeniable. And with that, let's turn to another enigma, one where the line between human ingenuity and myth grows even thinner. Now, let's explore how the Philadelphia experiment leaped from whispered rumors to pop culture legend, and whether hidden fragments of truth might lurk beneath the myth. The story's journey into the mainstream began in the 1960s, when authors and filmmakers seized its blend of science and suspense. Books like The Philadelphia Experiment, Project Invisibility, treated the tale as fact, while movies like the 1984 cult classic, The Philadelphia Experiment, dramatized the ship's disappearance with eerie special effects. These adaptations didn't just entertain, they amplified the mystery, cementing the idea that the government had achieved the impossible. But here's the twist. While the Navy denies the fantastical claims, declassified records reveal they were working on stealth technology during World War II. One project, codenamed Project Rainbow, focused on degaussing using electrical currents to erase a ship's magnetic signature and avoid underwater mines. It's a far cry from invisibility, but mix this real research with post-war sci-fi tropes, and you've got a recipe for conspiracy. Even the term rainbow might have fueled speculation, echoing the colorful jargon of classified programs. The myth also drew power from its timing. The Cold War bred paranoia about secret weapons, from mind control to weather manipulation. When UFO sightings surged in the 1950s, the Philadelphia experiment offered a tantalizing template. What if the government had mastered teleportation or cloaking? Tabloids and talk shows ran wild, splicing Allen's claims with half-understood science. By the 1990s, the legend had seeped into video games, comics, and even a Simpsons parody, proof of its grip on the imagination. Yet the most intriguing angle isn't the fiction, it's the real military tech that edges close to sci-fi. In the 1940s, the U.S. tested radar-absorbing materials and electronic countermeasures, precursors to modern stealth aircraft. The Navy also experimented with high-voltage fields, though records show these were for mine defense, not teleportation. Could snippets of these projects have been twisted into the Eldridge tale? It's possible. Secrecy breeds speculation, and in the shadows of classified research, myths thrive. What's left today is a cultural artifact, a story that says more about our fears than about history. The Philadelphia experiment endures because it taps into a timeless question. How much does the government hide? Whether through films, documentaries, or online forums, the legend keeps evolving, adapting to new anxieties. And that's the real magic of the story, not the vanishing ship, but our endless fascination with the idea that science, in the wrong hands, could defy the laws of nature. With that in mind, let's turn to a mystery where the line between human error and the unexplained grows even murkier. Now, let's step into a mystery so baffling, it feels ripped straight from a spy thriller, except it's all too real. In August 1966, on a quiet hilltop near Rio de Janeiro, two men were found dead under circumstances that defy easy explanation. Their bodies were posed side by side, faces covered with strange lead masks, their hands clutching cryptic notes that only deepened the enigma. This is the lead masks case, a puzzle that has tormented investigators and conspiracy theorists for decades. The victims, identified as electronics technicians Manuel Pereira da Cruz and Miguel José Viana, were no ordinary men. They had left their homes days earlier, telling family they were going to buy supplies for an undisclosed project. What they were actually doing remains unclear, but their final act, donning homemade lead masks inscribed with obscure symbols, suggests they expected to encounter something extraordinary. The notes found on them added another layer of strangeness. One read, "After meeting at the appointed place, follow the determined protocol. Protect your faces with the masks to await the predicted signal." So what were they waiting for? Theories range from the eerily plausible to the wildly speculative. Some point to their backgrounds in electronics, suggesting they might have been involved in secret experiments, perhaps with radiation or even early attempts at mind control technology. Brazil in the 1960s was a hotbed of both military intrigue and occult fascination, making espionage a plausible angle. Declassified documents from the era reveal that the country's military government did collaborate with foreign agencies on clandestine projects, but nothing directly ties to this case. Then there's the occult angle. The mask symbols resembled those used in esoteric traditions, fueling speculation that the men were part of a secret society attempting to commune with otherworldly forces. Ritualistic elements like the careful positioning of the bodies and the deliberate choice of a hilltop, often seen as a liminal space in occult lore, hint at a ceremonial purpose. Yet no known group ever claimed them as members, and their families insisted they had no interest in the supernatural, the most haunting possibility. That this was a tragic accident. Lead masks are sometimes used in radiation shielding, and the men's notes could hint at a misguided attempt to test homemade equipment. Brazil had recently expanded its nuclear research programs, and amateur scientists dabbling in dangerous materials wasn't unheard of. But without traces of radiation at the scene or in their bodies, this theory remains incomplete. Decades later, the case still taunts us. Modern investigators armed with forensic tools have revisited it, yet the answers slip away like smoke. Internet sleuths dissect every clue: the odd weather conditions reported that night, the men's rumored ties to a local inventor, even the possibility of hallucinogens, but the truth stays stubbornly out of reach. What makes the lead masks case endure isn't just the mystery, but the way it mirrors our own fears of covert experiments, of forbidden knowledge, of ordinary people caught in something far bigger than themselves. And as we peel back the layers of one enigma, another waits just ahead, one where the line between human error and the unexplained grows even thinner. Moving from the shadows of 1960s Brazil into the digital age, the lead masks case has found new life in the hands of internet detectives and documentary filmmakers. Decades after those eerie hilltop deaths, the mystery continues to captivate, proving that some puzzles refuse to stay buried. What makes this story endure isn't just the unanswered questions, it's how modern tools and global collaboration have breathed fresh energy into the hunt for answers. Online communities, particularly on platforms like Reddit, have dissected every scrap of evidence with forensic precision. Threads stretching back years analyze everything from the curvature of the lead masks to the syntax of the cryptic notes. One popular theory suggests the men were amateur radio enthusiasts attempting to intercept classified signals, with the masks serving as makeshift shielding. Others speculate they were lured into a doomed experiment by shadowy figures, pointing to rumored connections with a local inventor known for dabbling in fringe science. The sheer volume of discussion has turned the case into a crowdsourced cold case, a digital detective story where armchair sleuths trade theories like trading cards. Documentaries have also taken up the torch, framing the mystery for new audiences. A 2019 Brazilian film reenacted the events with chilling attention to detail, interviewing retired investigators and even tracking down relatives of the deceased. Though it offered no definitive answers, it highlighted a crucial detail often overlooked. The weather reports from that August night noted strange atmospheric disturbances, fueling speculation about electromagnetic phenomena. Meanwhile, a 2021 international podcast series approached the case through the lens of Cold War paranoia, drawing parallels to other unsolved deaths linked to classified projects. What's fascinating is how technology has both clarified and complicated the puzzle. Advanced image analysis of the mask's symbols revealed potential links to alchemical texts, while handwriting experts debated whether the notes were coerced or willingly written. Yet for every breakthrough, there's a setback. Key evidence, like the original autopsy reports, has vanished from police archives, and soil samples from the hilltop were never preserved. The Internet's greatest strength, its ability to amplify whispers into theories, can also drown out facts with noise. Perhaps the most haunting contribution comes from the families of the deceased. In recent interviews, Cruz's daughter admitted her father had been secretive about his work, but insisted he was no occultist. Viana's nephew, however, recalled childhood stories of his uncle's fascination with invisible energies, adding another layer of ambiguity. These personal accounts remind us that behind the conspiracy boards and viral threads, real lives were forever altered by this enigma. As the digital age keeps the lead mask's case alive, one thing becomes clear. The truth may lie not in a single grand revelation, but in the collective weight of these fragments, each theory, each clue, each retelling adding another piece to a puzzle we're still assembling. And just when you think the story can't get any stranger, another mystery waits, this time from the icy solitude of a remote Scottish lighthouse. Now, shifting from the digital echoes of the lead mask's case to the windswept isolation of the North Atlantic, we arrive at one of maritime history's most perplexing vanishings, the Flannan Isles lighthouse mystery. In December 1900, 3 keepers stationed on the remote Scottish archipelago evaporated without a trace, leaving behind a lighthouse fully operational yet eerily devoid of human presence. No signs of struggle, no farewell notes, just an untouched meal on the table and a logbook entry hinting at a storm that never officially occurred. At the heart of the enigma is the stark contrast between the scene investigators discovered and the official weather records. The keeper's log described ferocious winds on the day of their disappearance, yet meteorological data showed calm seas. This discrepancy birthed competing theories. Some argue a rogue wave, a sudden, colossal wall of water unique to the area, could have swept the men from the cliffs as they secured equipment. Others point to the lighthouse's volatile history, noting that one keeper had previously reported unexplained footsteps and whispers in the tower, fueling speculation of supernatural forces at play. The human element deepens the intrigue. Thomas Marshall, the second assistant, wrote in the log of a storm so wild none of us have seen the likes before, yet his colleagues left no corroborating accounts. Their personal effects, including oilskins and a half-eaten meal, suggested they vanished mid-task as if snatched away in an instant. The lack of damage to the lighthouse ruled out a structural disaster, while the untouched lifeboat dismissed theories of an attempted escape. It's as if the men simply stepped into thin air. Modern reinvestigations have added nuance without solving the core puzzle. Oceanographers confirm the Flannan Isles are prone to freak waves, sudden surges capable of reaching 100 feet, a plausible culprit for an outdoor tragedy. Yet skeptics highlight the keeper's strict protocols. Seasoned professionals wouldn't all risk exposure simultaneously. Alternative explanations range from a fight that spiraled into mutual drowning, though no evidence supports this, to covert espionage, given the lighthouse's strategic view of wartime shipping lanes. The most haunting detail, the final log entry penned by Marshall, included an odd phrase, "God is over all." Whether this reflected fear, resignation, or something darker remains debated. The case endures not just for its unanswered questions, but for what it reveals about isolation's psychological toll. These men spent months cut off from civilization, their only company the crashing waves and seabirds. Did the solitude warp their judgment, or did something far more sinister intervene? As we leave the Flannan Isles behind, the mystery lingers like the fog that often blankets those cliffs. It's a reminder that even in our modern age, some vanishings refuse neat explanations. And just when you think history's strangest tales must surely run dry, another awaits, this time from a ghost ship found adrift with its crew frozen in terror. Stepping from the unsolved enigma of the Flannan Isles, let's widen our lens to the broader ocean of maritime mysteries where isolation and the unforgiving sea conspire to create tales that defy logic. The vanishing of the lighthouse keepers wasn't an isolated incident. History is dotted with similar disappearances that blur the line between human error and the supernatural. Consider the Mary Celeste, perhaps the most famous ghost ship of all, found adrift in 1872 with its crew inexplicably missing. Like the Flannan Isles case, there were no signs of struggle, no lifeboats missing, and no clear reason for abandonment. Theories range from alcohol fumes causing panic to underwater earthquakes, yet none fully explain why experienced sailors would flee a perfectly seaworthy vessel. Then there's the chilling parallel of the Carol A. Deering, a schooner discovered run aground off North Carolina in 1921. Its crew vanished and its navigation equipment eerily undisturbed. Both cases share a haunting commonality: the sea's ability to erase lives without leaving a trace. But what connects these vanishings beyond the physical is the psychological toll of isolation. Imagine months spent on a ship or in a lighthouse, surrounded by nothing but endless waves and howling winds. The mind can play cruel tricks. Sailors have long spoken of ocean madness, a form of delirium brought on by prolonged solitude and sensory deprivation. In the case of the Flannan Isles keepers, did the isolation amplify mundane risks, a simple misstep on a slippery ledge, or did it twist perception to the point of collective delusion? Modern psychology sheds light on this darker side of solitude. Studies of Antarctic researchers and submarine crews reveal how extreme isolation can trigger paranoia, hallucinations, and irrational decision-making. The third quarter phenomenon, where morale plummets after the halfway mark of a mission, might explain why the Flannan Isles log entries grew increasingly erratic. When your world shrinks to a sliver of rock or a metal hull, even minor stresses, a creaking door, a shadow at the periphery of vision, can spiral into existential dread. Yet isolation isn't the only culprit. The ocean itself remains one of Earth's last great unknowns. Freak waves, like the one theorized to have struck the Flannan Isles, are now scientifically documented, with satellites recording walls of water over 100 feet tall. Combine that with the psychological fragility induced by isolation, and you have a recipe for disaster. The sea doesn't need ghosts or aliens to be terrifying. Its sheer scale and unpredictability are enough. As we turn from these vanishing acts, remember that the ocean's greatest mystery might not be what it takes, but how effortlessly it conceals its secrets. Next, we'll confront a ghost ship with a far more visceral horror, one where the crew didn't vanish, but met a fate so gruesome it froze their faces in terror. Leaving behind the eerie silence of vanished crews, we now face a horror that refused to stay hidden. The SS Aurang Medan offers no comforting mystery of disappearance, only a tableau of death so vivid it chills the bones. In June of 1947, multiple ships in the Strait of Malacca picked up a frantic SOS from the Dutch freighter. All officers, including the captain, dead in chartroom and bridge. Possibly whole crew dead. Then, after a burst of static, the final words, "I die." What rescuers found when they boarded the drifting vessel surpassed even those grim warnings. Every crew member lay dead, their corpses sprawled on the deck, eyes wide open, mouths twisted in screams, arms clawing toward some unseen threat. even the ship's dog wasn't spared, its body rigid with terror. No wounds, no signs of struggle, just a crew frozen in their final moments of agony. The rescuers' relief at finding no immediate danger turned to panic when smoke began seeping from the hull, forcing them to abandon ship moments before the Aurang Medan erupted in flames. It sank swiftly, taking any forensic clues to the bottom of the sea and leaving behind a puzzle that has taunted investigators for decades. So what could explain such a nightmare? Some point to carbon monoxide poisoning from faulty ventilation, but that doesn't account for the expressions of sheer terror or the lack of the telltale cherry red skin discoloration. Others suggest illegal chemical weapons, perhaps smuggled from post-war Japan, accidentally released. The Strait of Malacca was a notorious hub for black market arms in the 40s, and declassified documents reveal Allied concerns about leftover Japanese nerve agents. Yet no trace of such chemicals was ever confirmed. Then there's the wild card theory, methane hydrates. These pockets of flammable gas trapped under the ocean floor can erupt without warning, displacing oxygen and causing hallucinations before asphyxiation. Could a sudden release have driven the crew mad with fear before silently killing them? Skeptics, however, note glaring holes in the story. No Dutch shipping records list an SS Aurang Medan, and contemporaneous newspaper accounts relied heavily on second-hand testimony. The most detailed report came from an American wire service citing unnamed British sources, hardly ironclad evidence. Maritime historians suspect the tale may be a Frankenstein's monster of real disasters stitched together with pulp magazine sensationalism. Stories of ghost ships sold papers, and the post-war era was ripe for eerie legends. Yet the myth endures because it taps into our primal fear of the sea's indifference. Unlike the Mary Celeste's quiet mystery, the Aurang Medan forces us to confront death mid-scream. Whether fact or folklore, it reminds us that the ocean doesn't need ghosts to be horrifying. Sometimes reality is nightmare enough. Now let's shift from the horrors of the deep to an enigma carved into city streets, where cryptic tiles whisper secrets about Jupiter and Kubrick. But before we leave the chilling tale of the Aurang Medan behind, let's pull back the curtain on how legends like this take hold. The truth is, the maritime world has always been fertile ground for tall tales, and this story is no exception. Digging into the archives reveals something startling. There's no concrete evidence the SS Aurang Medan ever existed. Dutch shipping registries from the era show no record of a vessel by that name, and the most detailed accounts of the incident come not from official reports, but from sensationalized articles in pulp magazines like the Proceedings of the Merchant Marine Council. These publications were notorious for blending fact with fiction to sell copies, often embellishing scraps of real events into full-blown horror stories. One of the earliest mentions of the Aurang Medan appeared in a 1948 issue of the American magazine Proceedings, which cited unnamed British sources. But here's the catch: those sources were never verified. Maritime historians suspect the story might be a patchwork of several real tragedies stitched together. For example, in 1947, the year the Aurang Medan supposedly met its doom, multiple ships in the Pacific vanished under mysterious circumstances, some due to undetonated World War II mines or rogue waves. Others fell victim to cargo explosions, like the French freighter Grand Camp, which blew up in Texas City that same year, killing hundreds. It's possible these real disasters were folded into the Aurang Medan myth to make it more gripping. Then there's the role of post-war anxiety. The late 1940s were a time of global unease, nuclear fears, Cold War tensions, and the lingering trauma of World War II. People were primed for stories that mirrored their sense of lurking, invisible threats. A ghost ship where the crew died screaming with no visible cause. That tapped perfectly into the era's paranoia. Even the timing of the story's spread is telling. By the 1950s, pulp magazines were in fierce competition with television, so they cranked up the drama to keep readers hooked. The Aurang Medan became a staple of maritime horror, retold with increasingly lurid details, each version more terrifying than the last. But why does this matter? Because the Aurang Medan isn't just a spooky campfire tale, it's a case study in how folklore evolves. Real maritime disasters are tragic enough, but when they're twisted into legends, they overshadow the actual history. The thousands of sailors who really vanished at sea, whose stories were lost to time, deserve more than to be eclipsed by a myth. So while the Aurang Medan makes for a thrilling story, it's also a reminder to question the tales we inherit. After all, the ocean has enough genuine mysteries without inventing new ones. Now, let's step away from the high seas and onto the streets, where another kind of mystery has been hiding in plain sight for decades, one made of tile and cryptic messages. Shifting from the high seas to the urban jungle, we stumble upon a mystery carved right into the pavement. Since the 1980s, strange tiles embedded in city streets across the United States and South America have baffled pedestrians and historians alike. Known as the Toynbee tiles, these cryptic messages appear to be made of linoleum or some similar material, pressed into the asphalt where they slowly wear away under the feet of countless passers-by. Each tile bears variations of the same bizarre message, often reading something like, "Toynbee idea in movie 2001 resurrect dead on planet Jupiter." The references are puzzling, a nod to historian Arnold Toynbee, Stanley Kubrick's sci-fi masterpiece 2001, A Space Odyssey, and the giant planet Jupiter. Some tiles expand on the theme, urging readers to duplicate the message or accusing media outlets of suppressing the Toynbee idea. Others veer into even stranger territory, mentioning David Mamet or Duke of Hazzard, leaving researchers scratching their heads. So who was behind these enigmatic street artworks? The most compelling evidence points to a reclusive Philadelphia man named James Morasco. In the early 1980s, Morasco wrote letters to newspapers echoing the tile's Jupiter resurrection theme, claiming Toynbee's writings inspired a way to bring the dead back to life on another planet. He even linked it to Kubrick's film, suggesting the director had secretly endorsed his theories. Morasco's wife later confirmed he'd been experimenting with linoleum tiles in their basement, though she dismissed his ideas as eccentric fantasies. The tile's production method only adds to the intrigue. Researchers believe the artist placed them by kneeling beside parked cars, slipping the message face down onto the street, then embedding it by pressing the car's tire over it, letting traffic do the rest. This explains why many tiles appear near intersections where vehicles stop frequently. Over time, heat and pressure fuse the tile into the asphalt, though weather and wear eventually erase them. Some have lasted decades, while others vanish within years. What makes the Toynbee tiles more than just odd graffiti is their unresolved meaning. Was Morasco promoting a genuine belief, or was it an elaborate art project? The references to media conspiracy suggest a deeper critique, perhaps mocking how fringe ideas get sensationalized. Kubrick's film, after all, deals with human evolution and alien intelligence, themes that could symbolize society's struggle to grasp radical concepts. Or maybe the tiles were simply one man's way of shouting into the void, leaving behind fragments of a private mythology for strangers to interpret. The mystery took another twist when a new wave of tiles appeared in the 2000s, this time signed The Resurrector and featuring bizarre political rants. These newer additions, dubbed House of Hades tiles, seem connected yet distinct, suggesting either a copycat or an evolution of the original artist's work. Either way, the Toynbee phenomenon endures as a testament to how public spaces can become canvases for the unexplained. Unlike ghost ships or lost villages, these tiles are tangible. You can still find them in cities like Philadelphia or Buenos Aires, slowly fading underfoot. They blur the line between art, obsession, and urban legend, proving that sometimes the weirdest history isn't hidden in ancient texts or remote islands, but right beneath our feet. And with that, let's turn our attention to a disappearance that swallowed an entire community, one that may be more myth than reality. Now, stepping beyond the mystery of the Toynbee tiles themselves, let's consider the broader allure of anonymous urban art. There's something undeniably magnetic about stumbling upon a hidden message or an unsanctioned creation in the middle of a bustling city. It feels like a secret handshake between the artist and those who pause to notice, a fleeting connection in an otherwise impersonal urban landscape. Anonymous public art, whether it's cryptic tiles, guerrilla installations, or sprawling murals under cover of night, taps into our collective curiosity. Who made this? Why here? What does it mean? These questions linger long after the encounter, turning sidewalks and walls into open-air riddles. The ethics of preserving or removing such works are far from straightforward. On one hand, cities often view unsanctioned art as vandalism, a blight to be scrubbed away. After all, property owners didn't consent to these interventions, and some pieces may degrade infrastructure over time. But on the other hand, figures like Banksy have shown how street art can become cultural landmarks, drawing tourists and sparking dialogue. The Toynbee tiles occupy a unique middle ground. Unlike spray-painted tags, they're embedded physically into the streets, almost archaeological in their persistence. Removing them isn't just erasing graffiti, it's scraping away a layer of urban folklore. This tension raises deeper questions about who gets to decide what belongs in public spaces. Municipal governments prioritize order and functionality, but grassroots art challenges that control, insisting that cities are living narratives, not just grids of concrete. In Philadelphia, where many Toynbee tiles have been documented, locals and historians have debated whether to preserve the most iconic examples. Some argue they're historical artifacts, deserving the same care as a colonial-era monument. Others counter that their impermanence is part of their power, that they were never meant to last, just like the ideas they broadcast into the universe. The anonymous creator's role adds another layer to the debate. By remaining hidden, artists like the Toynbee tiler surrender ownership of their work, allowing it to morph into something communal. The tiles become less about the creator's intent and more about how passers-by interpret them. This democratization of meaning is rare in a world where art is usually curated, labeled, and monetized. Yet it also complicates preservation efforts. Without the artist's voice, how do we determine what's worth saving? Interestingly, anonymity in public art isn't just a modern phenomenon. Think of the Lascaux cave paintings or the Nazca lines, centuries-old creations made by nameless hands, now revered as cultural treasures. The Toynbee tiles, though far younger, echo this tradition of enigmatic authorship. They force us to confront why we value art in the first place. Is it the skill behind it, the message, or simply the thrill of discovery? As cities evolve, the fate of works like the Toynbee tiles hangs in the balance. Some will vanish under new pavement, while others might be carefully excavated and displayed in museums, a paradox, given their original purpose as street-level provocations. Yet perhaps that's the point. Anonymous art isn't meant to be solved or settled. It's a conversation starter, a crack in the mundane that invites us to look closer. And in a world where so much is explained and commodified, that's a rare kind of magic. Next, we'll journey to the frozen reaches of Canada, where an entire village disappearance has fueled whispers of the supernatural and the sobering realities of colonial history. Shifting our focus from urban mysteries to the vast wilderness of Canada, we encounter a story that blurs the line between folklore and unsettling reality: the disappearance of an entire Inuit village near Angakuni Lake in the 1930s. According to reports, a fur trapper named Joe Labelle arrived at the settlement to find it eerily abandoned. Food still simmered over fires, personal belongings lay untouched, and not a single soul, human or sled dog, remained. The silence was absolute, as if the community had vanished into thin air. Labelle's account, published in a 1930 newspaper, described disturbing details. graves unearthed from the frozen ground with the bodies missing, and no tracks leading away from the village despite heavy snowfall. The story spread like wildfire, fueling speculation about extraterrestrial abductions, supernatural forces, or even a secret government operation. But here's where skepticism creeps in. Lebel was the only source, and no official records or other witnesses corroborated his claims. Modern researchers have struggled to locate the village's exact coordinates, leading some to question whether it existed at all. Natural explanations offer plausible alternatives. Harsh Arctic conditions could have driven residents to relocate abruptly during a storm, though this doesn't account for the uneaten food or disturbed graves. Avalanches or thin ice might have caused fatalities, but where were the bodies? Another theory suggests mass hysteria or a sudden disease outbreak. Yet epidemics leave traces, and Inuit oral histories from the region don't mention such an event. The most damning evidence against the tale: no contemporary Inuit accounts support it, and later investigations found no archaeological evidence of a village near Angakuni Lake matching Lebel's description. This raises uncomfortable questions about how marginalized stories are told. Sensationalized reports of vanishing natives were alarmingly common in early 20th century media, often erasing indigenous agency or tragedies under layers of mystery. The Angakuni story, whether wholly invented or grossly exaggerated, reflects a pattern where colonial narratives overshadowed Inuit voices. Rather than acknowledging forced relocations, starvation due to disrupted hunting grounds, or other documented hardships, these tales framed indigenous disappearances as supernatural riddles distracting from real historical injustices. Yet the story endures, partly because it taps into primal fears. The idea of an entire community evaporating without a trace unsettles our need for closure and control. It's a blank canvas for conspiracy theories and horror tropes, from interdimensional portals to vengeful spirits. Films and books have fictionalized the event, further mudding fact and legend. What's left is a cautionary tale about the power and danger of mystery. Without verifiable facts, stories like Angakuni's become mirrors, reflecting our anxieties more than historical truth. They also risk obscuring the resilience and realities of Inuit communities, past and present. Perhaps the real vanishing act here is the erosion of indigenous histories beneath layers of colonial mythmaking. As we move forward, let's unravel another thread in history's tapestry, one where the sky itself seemed to turn against a small Kentucky town, raining down an unimaginable anomaly. Turning from the eerie mystery of Angakuni Lake, we must confront a deeper and more uncomfortable truth lurking beneath these vanishing village stories. The sensational tale of an entire Inuit community disappearing without a trace isn't just a spooky campfire story. It's part of a long tradition where colonial narratives have rewritten or outright erased the real histories of indigenous peoples. When stories like Angakuni spread, they often do more than entertain. They distract from documented tragedies, forced relocations, starvation due to disrupted hunting grounds, or diseases introduced by outsiders, all of which were very real struggles for Inuit communities in the early 20th century. Instead of acknowledging these injustices, the vanishing village trope turns indigenous suffering into a supernatural spectacle, as if their disappearance were a puzzle to solve rather than a consequence of systemic neglect or violence. This pattern isn't unique to the Arctic. Across North America, Australia, and other colonized regions, similar tales have flourished. Think of the lost colony of Roanoke, where the fate of English settlers dominates the narrative, while the experiences of the local Croatan people who likely absorbed the survivors are relegated to a footnote. Or the Australian Pintupi Nine, a group of indigenous Australians who lived traditionally in the Gibson Desert until 1984, framed as a last contact story rather than a testament to resilience against colonial displacement. Why does this matter? Because these myths don't just obscure history, they shape how we understand power. When indigenous communities are portrayed as mysteriously vanishing, it implies their absence was inevitable, even fateful, rather than the result of deliberate policies like residential schools, land seizures, or cultural suppression. The truth is far messier and more human. Inuit oral histories, for example, speak of adaptability, survival, and continuity, even in the face of immense change. Yet these voices are rarely centered in the Angakuni narrative. Modern researchers have tried to correct this imbalance. Historians like Renee Fawcett have highlighted how early 20th century newspapers routinely exaggerated or fabricated stories about indigenous peoples to sell copies, often playing into racist stereotypes of primitive cultures prone to inexplicable disasters. Meanwhile, Inuit elders have shared accounts of gradual migrations due to shifting caribou herds or trade opportunities, mundane but meaningful realities that don't fit the eerie vanishing act trope. The Angakuni story endures because it's seductive. It lets audiences indulge in mystery without confronting uncomfortable truths about resource extraction, cultural erasure, or the ongoing marginalization of indigenous communities. But when we peel back the layers, we find something more revealing. A reminder that history isn't just about what happened, it's about who gets to tell the story and why. As we move forward, let's carry this lens with us, especially when confronted with tales that seem too strange to be true. Often, the real mystery isn't what's missing from the story, it's why certain voices were left out in the first place. Shifting from the sobering realities of colonial narratives, let's lighten the tone with a story so bizarre it sounds like something out of a tall tale, the Kentucky meat shower of 1876. Picture this, a quiet afternoon in Bath County, Kentucky, where a woman named Mrs. Crouch was working in her garden when suddenly the sky seemed to rain meat. Not just a few odd chunks, but slabs of fleshy material falling for several minutes, covering an area roughly 100 yards long. Witnesses described it as beef-like, some claiming it was lean, others insisting it had the texture of mutton or venison. Local newspapers had a field day with headlines screaming about the mysterious meat from the heavens. So what really happened? Scientists and skeptics have floated several theories over the years, each stranger than the last. One of the earliest explanations pointed to vultures specifically, their stomachs. The idea was that a flock of buzzards mid-flight might have regurgitated partially digested meat en masse. While vultures do vomit when threatened, the sheer volume reported in Bath County makes this theory a stretch. Plus, witnesses swore the meat was fresh, not rancid or bile-covered. Then there's the atmospheric angle. Some proposed that violent winds could have scooped up meat from a nearby slaughterhouse or drying rack, carrying it aloft before dumping it miles away. The problem: no one in the area reported missing carcasses or butchered animals that day. Others suggested the meat might have been a bizarre form of star jelly, a gelatinous substance sometimes linked to meteor showers, though star jelly typically lacks the fibrous texture described by witnesses. Of course, hoaxes can't be ruled out. The 19th century was fertile ground for sensationalist journalism, and pranksters weren't uncommon. One chemist at the time, Dr. Alan McLean Hamilton, claimed the meat was actually nostoc, a type of algae that swells into gelatinous blobs after rain. But when samples were sent to biologists at the Smithsonian, they identified it as lung tissue from a horse or human infant, only to backtrack later, calling it likely a mix of cartilage and connective tissue. The Kentucky meat shower remains unsolved, but it's a perfect snapshot of how folklore and science collide. Unlike the darker vanishing village myths, this one feels almost playful, a reminder that history's oddities don't always carry heavy moral lessons. Sometimes they're just weird, and that's okay, but if you're still craving answers, consider this: the most mundane explanation might be the most plausible. In a time before food safety regulations, could a passing wagon loaded with spoiled meat have been the culprit? Or was it, as some modern researchers suggest, a freak weather event that hurled fragments of a distant animal carcass into the sky? We'll likely never know for sure, and maybe that's the charm. After all, history isn't just about facts, it's about the stories we keep telling, even when they defy logic. Now, let's turn to our final mystery, where a single photograph from World War II would spark decades of time travel speculation from the puzzling spectacle of falling meat. Let's dig deeper into the science and sensationalism that turned the Kentucky incident into a lasting mystery. 19th century newspapers thrived on the bizarre, and the meat shower was prime material. Editors knew oddities sold papers, often embellishing stories or skipping fact checks to fuel public fascination. This wasn't unique to Kentucky hoaxes like the Great Moon hoax of 1835, where a New York paper claimed astronomers found bat-winged creatures on the moon. Show how eagerly audiences devoured the unbelievable. Modern science offers clearer lenses to examine such events. Take star jelly, often tied to meteor showers. Today, we know it's likely frog or worm egg masses or even slime mold expelled by predators or weather. Similarly, the meat shower's vulture vomit theory gains nuance with zoology. Turkey vultures can't carry large quantities of meat, but a sudden disturbance like a storm might trigger a group to regurgitate simultaneously. It's rare but not impossible. Forensic tools unavailable in 1876 could have settled debates. DNA analysis, for instance, might have identified the meat's origin within hours. Yet even now, some oddities resist tidy explanations. Atmospheric scientists note animal rain occurrences worldwide, from fish in Honduras to spiders in Australia, usually linked to waterspouts or tornadoes lifting creatures into updrafts. Could a freak wind have snatched meat from an unrecorded source? Without time machines, we're left weighing probabilities. The hoax angle remains tempting. The era's penny press prioritized drama over accuracy, and pranksters exploited this. A rival butcher dumping waste, a traveling circus staging publicity stunts. All plausible, yet the earnest reactions from Smithsonian scientists to local farmers suggest genuine confusion. Ultimately, the meat shower mirrors how we process the unexplained, with equal parts curiosity and skepticism. It's a reminder that history's strangest tales often live in the gap between what we know and what we're willing to imagine. And while modern tools solve some mysteries, others endure, keeping the past deliciously unpredictable. Now, our final story takes us from Kentucky's skies to a World War II photo that convinced thousands a time traveler had been caught on camera, shifting gears from unexplained meat showers to a photograph that ignited modern conspiracy theories. Let's examine the so-called time-traveling hipster of 1941. The black and white image, taken during the reopening of the South Fork Bridge in British Columbia, shows a crowd in typical wartime attire except for one man. His outfit stands out starkly: a knitted sweater, rounded sunglasses, and what appears to be a portable camera slung around his neck. To contemporary eyes, he looks like he stepped straight out of a 21st century coffee shop, sparking wild claims of temporal displacement. Fashion history, however, dismantles this myth with precision. The man's modern sweater was a common design by the 1940s, often hand-knit with the same ribbed patterns we recognize today. His sunglasses, not Ray-Bans but folding spectacles, a practical style popular among outdoorsmen and factory workers to shield their eyes from glare. Even his camera was likely a period-appropriate Kodak folding model, compact enough to resemble today's devices. The illusion of modernity is a trick of hindsight. We project our own aesthetics onto the past, forgetting that trends are cyclical. Psychology plays a role too. Pareidolia, the human tendency to impose familiar patterns onto ambiguous stimuli, explains why we recognize modern elements in historical context. A similar effect fuels claims of time-traveling figures in Renaissance paintings or ancient coins. Our brains crave narrative cohesion, stitching together anomalies to fit preconceived ideas, whether it's time travelers or hidden messages. The photo's resurgence in the 2010s, shared virally with cropped context, amplified the misconception. Internet sleuths ignored key details. The man's clothing was affordable and mass-produced in his era, and local newspapers from the event made no note of any out-of-place attendee. Even the bridge's history grounds the scene firmly in 1941, with construction records confirming the date. Debunking doesn't dull the story's charm, though. It reveals how easily history can be reshaped by selective perception and viral culture. The hipster wasn't defying space-time, he was just a man dressed for the weather, immortalized in a moment that later generations would misread. In a way, his accidental fame mirrors how all historical mysteries emerge, not from supernatural causes, but from the gaps in our collective memory and the stories we choose to tell. As we wrap up our journey through history's most baffling events, remember that reality is often stranger than fiction, but rarely because of time travelers. The truth lies in the nuances, waiting for curious minds to piece them together. Now let's consider how the digital age transforms historical oddities into full-blown legends. The tale of the time-traveling hipster isn't just a quirky footnote, it's a textbook example of how online communities reshape history. In the past, such mysteries might have lingered in obscure books or local folklore. Today, a single viral post can catapult them into global consciousness, often stripping away context in the process. Platforms like Reddit and TikTok thrive on mystery, encouraging users to reinterpret old photos or documents through modern lenses. Algorithms prioritize engagement, rewarding theories that are sensational over those grounded in facts. This creates a feedback loop where the most outlandish explanations gain traction, while mundane truths get drowned out. The 1941 bridge photo, for instance, resurfaced decades later as a cropped, grainy version online, with captions insisting the man's attire proved time travel. Never mind that his outfit was thoroughly ordinary for his time. The allure of a sci-fi narrative was too tempting to resist. Language also plays a role in myth-making. Terms like glitch in the matrix or proof of time travelers frame these cases as puzzles to be solved rather than historical artifacts to be understood. This linguistic shift invites armchair detectives to project their own biases onto the past. Consider how often vintage photos of people using early computers get labeled as time travelers with laptops, ignoring that bulky, experimental tech existed long before the digital age. The internet loves a clean, dramatic story, even when reality is far messier. Yet there's a deeper irony here. While digital tools can distort history, they also empower researchers to debunk myths faster than ever. Archivists and historians now crowdsource identifications for mysterious figures in old photos, tracing clothing patterns or camera models to pin down their origins. In the hipster's case, online communities eventually uncovered the bridge's construction records and period catalogs featuring his exact sunglasses. The same platforms that spread the conspiracy also helped dismantle it, proof that the internet's relationship with history is as complex as the stories it amplifies. What does this mean for how we engage with the past? Viral mysteries remind us that history isn't static. It's a living dialogue between facts and the stories we tell about them. The next time you stumble upon a mind-blowing historical anomaly, pause and ask, is this truly unexplained or just unexplained yet? The digital age gives us endless opportunities to marvel at the past, but also the tools to understand it more deeply than ever before. From the dancing plagues to vanishing villages, these 25 events remind us just how strange and unpredictable history can be. They challenge what we think we know about the past, weaving together facts, myths, and mysteries in ways that keep even experts guessing. Whether it's mass hysteria making people dance to their deaths or a tidal wave of molasses swallowing a city, these stories prove reality can be stranger than fiction. What makes these events so fascinating isn't just their oddity, it's how they force us to rethink history itself. Official records often smooth over the messy, unexplained corners of the past, but these bizarre moments refuse to be neatly categorized. They linger in that gray area where folklore and documented history collide, inviting us to dig deeper. Take the Dyatlov Pass Incident decades later. We still debate whether it was an avalanche, secret military experiments, or something even darker. Or the Voynich Manuscript, a book no one can read, filled with plants that don't seem to exist. These aren't just dead ends, they're reminders that history is full of unanswered questions waiting for fresh perspectives. That's where you come in. Maybe one of these stories caught your attention: the eerie disappearance of the Flannan Isles lighthouse keepers, the unexplained Taos Hum, or the Great Emu War that left the Australian military humiliated. Drop a comment below and tell us which event stuck with you the most. Did we miss any bizarre historical moments you think deserve a spotlight? The conversation doesn't end here. History is a puzzle we're all piecing together, one strange detail at a time. If you've enjoyed this journey through the weirdest corners of the past, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. There's always more to explore: lost civilizations, unsolved crimes, and mysteries that defy logic. Who knows, the next video might feature the historical oddity you've been dying to hear about. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the truth isn't just out there, it's buried in the pages of history, waiting for someone to question the official story. See you in the next one.